All right, we are live right now. It's good to be with you. If you all don't know, this is Robert Phoenix, but I'm sure many of you all know he's an amazing astrologer, and we love talking astrology and going through the world and help you all navigate through the crazy times. How you doing, Robert?
David, I'm great, and it's great to be back here with you. I think it's been over a year since we last did this, and people are still talking about that last
I
show
know.
we did.
I know, and it was funny because the technology too, like, wasn't working, and like it was not the best setup, and we still put it through. And I'm amazed at looking at what we were talking about a year ago and where we're at now. And we were putting out the Paul Revere kind of astrology, notes, and telling it to people like this is gonna go really weird. And I remember, a lot of people, of course, were like on our side, but there was also a lot of people in the astrology community kind of looking at us like, oh yeah, right, things are gonna be normal. And it's been kind of interesting to watch now how things kind of come back around looking back a year later. And it's not that I think that you and I are like trying to prove things. It's just we really genuinely care about having people understand what's going on with the astrology, and that no matter how crazy it is, you can get through this stuff by just being aware of it and really applying it in your life so well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I was thinking about this earlier because I was, just pondering how different astrologers use astrology, and the belief system of a person will bleed into whatever they do, right? And my experience is that a lot of astrologers, although I think the tide is changing a little bit, but a lot of astrologers have tended to be kind of more progressive, left of center, and kind of more into, I don't know, like a traditional new age model. I don't want to be overgeneralizing, but that's been my experience for a long time. And what I've tried to do is I've tried to look at like cycles and use astrology from an agnostic perspective. I mean, clearly, I'm going to bleed through. I've got my own beliefs and opinions and perspectives, but I think when you do your best to honestly look at the astrology from an agnostic perspective and really read the giant celestial room, you can see where things are going. And sometimes they're not going in a good place. It's just the way it is. Not every day is, going to be sunshine in paradise. And we're in a really intense cycle right now. I mean, there's just, you can't sugarcoat where we are. Can good things come out of this? Yeah, certainly. But, we're in a place that we've never been before in terms of the world. And even the astrology is like really tilting out to the edge of those outer planets, right? We've got
Yeah.
Neptune and Pisces and Pluto, the final degrees of Capricorn, and we're really dealing with some very big collective cycles right now.
Well, that's interesting, especially, it's kind of like the weather, right? Like for some people, and we've always used that kind of analogy. Like it's not, there's some times where, gosh, like look at all the tornadoes that just went through the South, again. And that stuff happens. But I think when you're bringing up this great cycle that we're in, it's been so crazy as an astrologer, because watching it, it's not just one big cycle or two big cycles or three. It's so many big cycles happening at the same time that that's what makes this like, if you were to just take it as a like a an equation, it gets to where, even Albert Einstein at some point would be on his like 80th, chalkboard and being like, I don't know what's gonna happen here. you know I've never seen this many calculations, this many cycles happening at once in such a
Right.
short amount of time.
Right.
That, and I think it's the ultimate relief when you understand that, so you don't freak out when you look at the world like, is it all going crazy, or what's the reason why? It's so easy to see that it's just like, this is the ultimate time, and there's always a good reason for things happening. And that's, I think, that silver lining that you have to find. But you have to be willing to talk about the stuff. And to me and you, I think we love it. It's interesting to us. I don't know if I would ever uh want to be an astrologer if these events didn't happen. It would almost be like so boring. We've been so blessed to be astrologers during these times, to have the ability to understand the planets that, astrologers before us, just even 500 years ago didn't have access to, and to be able to see the amount of these, very rare cycles happening all at once during this period is an astrologer's dream to interpret and to be part of and to help guide.
Yeah, I think it's a really great perspective. And I think for a lot of people, they look at astrology on a personal level, like what am I dealing with in my own life? How are these cycles affecting me personally? And that stuff is all there, but we're also caught up in this much larger macro cycle too. So this macro cycle is interpenetrating into our individual cycles. And in a lot of ways, we have to be very cautious and aware to not get really caught up in that.
Right.
And because I think because I was looking at this, where are we, with the sky, and where are we with astrology? Are we at a point now where theoretically we should know ourselves enough so that we can ride the wave of these collective cycles now? Or can we move in and out of the personal cycles so that we can have a fluid relationship with the larger macro cycle? And I think it's something in between, but right now we're dealing with such large social forces, and social forces that are simultaneously creating a type of inertia, but also a type of chaos. It's really like a bizarre time. Like we seem to be stuck in this time loop where we go from one crisis to another crisis. It's like, let's just put the next crisis, in the queue, but nothing really is getting resolved. We're caught in this cycle, but at the same time, there's more chaos. So we have this inertia and this chaos, which I think can be very troubling and could also, make people crazy. I mean, these are really crazy energies because things are happening and things are not happening at the same time, right?
Yeah, because it could feel like, you're in that inertia, you're in that crazy cycle. And then there's moments where you're almost like hoping that you kind of get back in the cycle, because it almost feels like isolation, especially with all these stelliums going on now in Aquarius and Pisces, the last two signs of the zodiac. I mean, that's the farther, outreaches, if you want to call it Twilight Zone, to being stuck on an alien spaceship and the aliens giving you their own personal drug and you take it. That's how I'm kind of describing it. And you're like, oh, that's already trippy enough. Now I'm getting tripped out on the trippiness on the trip. It's like, whoa, what the heck is that? And you can have fun with that or not. Like, I'm not, of course, advocating to do drugs, but it's like, that's a good analogy of like, it's so far out there. Plus, if you think of, in astrology, it's always talked about the age of Pisces moving to this age of Aquarius. I mean, and just to think of just that switching of ages, or just if you just use every 2000 years in the Gregorian calendar that we use to the Julian calendar, I mean, the craziness happens every 2000 years in the cycles.
Right.
So the ages are not a joke. The precession of the equinox really is a big deal. But then you add all the planetary aspects on top of it, or even the science and the astronomy and what's going on with our own sun, our own planets, and in our own galaxy, and the discoveries that we're finding. You combine all that together, and it literally is, if it is an age of Aquarius, it is literally going into a completely different feeling and world. And to be a soul to go through it from Pisces to Aquarius is so rare. If you just think about the amount of, human beings that have been around for the last 2000 years, that's not a typical thing to even experience. So I used to say in a lecture I did in 2015 at Conscious Life Expo, I said, it's almost like, the human consciousness or just humanity itself has been kind of on the couch eating potato chips for the last couple thousand years. And then once this time comes, it's kind of like what the heck is this? It's not that it's uncomfortable. It's more about the uncomfort of like, I can't stay in this same energy and I have to vibrate it in a different way because it's coming whether you like it or not, and it's coming in a way that's not anybody can fully gauge it at this moment,
Yeah. I would agree. And, one of the things that I was thinking about when we were talking about, you were talking about Mars and Venus and Capricorn, in Aquarius. And if people want to understand like a mundane astrological example, right? So we have this guy Zolensky, who's in Ukraine. Well, he happens to be an Aquarian.
I know.
That's it. That's his sign. And so what do we see with Venus and Mars? We see this Venus Mars strange charisma, because Venus and Mars conjunctions have strange charisma.
Mm-hmm.
And it's leaning into the Zelensky sun sign, right? So he's getting the benefit of this Venus Mars conjunction. And I'd have to go back and look at his chart, but he's also got the Saturn Sun conjunction, which is generally, especially where his sun is, I think his sun is in the 9th house. So that is generally a time of arrival, especially when it's in the 9th house or the 10th house, where, you know, literally the sun is ascending towards the midheaven. It's kind of an auspicious moment. And I don't really believe he's an auspicious person. I have my own beliefs and opinions about him. But here you can see the astrology at work, right? The Venus-Mars conjunction, the Zolensky, the Aquarian, having, you know, this guy's got the world as a stage right now.
Yeah.
And Saturn is conferring onto him a level of authority, right? So you can see how this stuff works, whether or not you actually want to, you know, sit down and take a knee at the Church of Zolensky. So this is really weird, right? Apparently, like, he's got this fan club, like, you know, he's like this rock star now. And there are dudes that are like into Zolensky and they want to go down on him and like give him head.
And then there's women who are obsessed with him. It's
but that's the Venus Mars and Aquarius, right?
And the governments are obsessed with him.
Right. It's the Venus Mars conjunction, right? You got dudes that are into him. You got women that are into him, but they're not really into him because, hey, you know, he's my idea of a hero or whatever. No, there's like this strange kind of sexual transaction going on. It's totally bizarre.
I mean, think about just the other day, just like after he got and asked everybody, and we just paid him, you know, another 13 billion, and then he got another 800 million from Biden. And then yesterday, after the G7 meets and everybody meets, he just goes, well, I think everybody should give me 1% of their tanks and 1% of their military. I'm like, this guy has like a writer as if he's like a musician. Like, and I also need, you know, 1 year's worth of Monster energy drinks because I can get Red Bull from Germany. And I also, it's like, what else is this guy gonna ask? Like, what else can he can get whatever he wants? It's crazy.
Right. Well, apparently he has no shortage of nose candy.
I mean, yeah. Well, and how weird is it? He addresses the United States Congress and the executive branch in a t-shirt.
Right.
In a weird like office on a webcam from like 2011.
Right.
Like Ukraine is actually where a lot of tech is done. Like I use Livestream Studio, which is owned by Vimeo. And when I updated like a week ago, they're like built in bomb shelters in Ukraine. Right. So like Ukraine is not like a technological, like they kind of make it. All the video footage has been so weird, not only of him, or he was in front of a green screen the other day, like 2 days ago.
He was totally in front of a green screen.
Right. Like, and that's not conspiracy. Like it's just like him standing there in front of like a picture of Ukraine, like at night, like, you know, but like,
right.
And he's like, so where is he really even there? That's the big question.
Well, I think, you know, people who have curious minds want to know the answer to that question. They're asking that question. But the whole phenomena, the whole Zelensky phenomena, at the one time, it seems really astroturf. But then again, you look at the aspects and they're like really leaning into his son in the 9th house. Like, okay, it makes sense. I'm not really into it, but it makes sense.
It does make sense. I also think it's kind of interesting because Saturn's here, of course, in Aquarius as well, right?
Yeah. And
I always find Saturn, when it comes into your sign with the sun, it's a defining moment, of course, and it really redefines who you are.
Yep.
And it really does kind of do much more wonders than people think. You know, I think a lot of people.
I think the Saturn Sun conjunction is one of the most underrated aspects in astrology.
Correct. It is. It totally is, where this is who your soul is going to be. This is the direction it's going to take. It's very powerful, and it's I've found it to be very empowering and not a scary transit at all. If anything, I think it's, if you're willing to rise up to what the moment's calling you towards, it'll take you there.
Yeah. And especially with his son in the ninth house, it hasn't crossed the midheaven, so it's not descending, right? So literally, Saturn is making him a rising star. You know, Kamala Harris has Saturn in Aquarius conjunct her midheaven.
I know.
And I think it's a fait accompli that she's going to be president with that midheaven.
And with her full moon in her chart at 27 degrees and Pluto.
Aries. Is it Aries? Yeah. She's got full Aries full moon, right?
Aries full moon with her 27 Libra and Pluto.
Well, by the way, that's not an for anybody that's got an Aries full moon,
but that Pluto and America's Pluto is 27 Capricorn, squares both that sun and moon.
Yep.
And you know, what's kind of weird is, you know, President Trump was a full moon lunar eclipse energy. So, you know, there is kind of a similarity with them. And of course, you have to kind of look at it spiritually. It's kind of like the reactions that people have to her and then the reactions that people have to President Trump. There's that similarity.
Well, they're polar. They're both polarizing, right?
Exactly.
And Kamala is a Gemini rising. So that's going to be part of the polarizing trip. So, yeah, well, I think.
But I think that the Zielinski thing, though, has been really weird to watch because, of course, one, he was an actor about being a president and then happens to turn out to be a president. Jupiter, Saturn come in. And I mean, he was in the middle. This guy's been in the middle of everything. He's been in the middle of the impeachment for Trump. The first one.
That's right. Yeah, because they went over there. I think it was Giuliani. They went over there to try to find dirt on Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. You know, and by the way, I don't have a problem with that if it's in the service of national security. Yes. Right. So if Trump was involved and may have benefited from it, you know, so what? Politicians do it all the time. Like they do that shit all the time, right?
Right.
And at the end of the day, it would have been better, I think, for the country and the world for that stuff to actually be received by the mainstream media. But we know that wasn't going to happen. But yeah, Trump was there. He was there when Trump was going through this cycle.
Yeah. And it's really weird because, you know, that was Saturn in Capricorn. That was Pluto in Capricorn. And then 2020 hits and, you know, he's kind of still in there because the impeachment of Trump is happening there at the end of 2019 into 2020. And then we come into 2021 and he's still there with the talks of, you know, like he was kind of not fully there with Jupiter, Saturn kind of hit. But the second that all this stuff started coming into Aquarius, more so that Jupiter was leaving, it was like wild to watch. Like, is this going to be 20 years of Zielinski? You know what I mean? Like, you know, it's like.
Yeah, man. So that begs the question, you know, is
like what are they really planning to do with this guy? You know
okay. I wasn't going to go there because.
Why not? That's why I brought you on.
All right. So the question is Zielinski the Antichrist?
Oh, wow. I didn't know we were going there, but I'm down for it. You know, I'm down for it.
Right. Is Zielinski the Antichrist? Because to be the Antichrist would have Aquarian energy.
I mean, I know, and that might get people a little weird, but it's like, it's Saturn's energy, right? And it's going to come across as for all people. I mean, that's what scripture says as well, right? Like, no, it's like trying to unify the world under this kind of weird thing. And also, to me, anybody who I can't I know it sounds stupid, but this whole webcam thing, the green screen thing, the actor thing, the way that he talks, and it's like his people are dying. They're supposedly, right? All this crazy stuff's going on. And the way that you can see him getting off on it.
Oh yeah. No, so this reminds me of the time where George Bush was running Gulf War I. And the run up to it, and even the first few weeks of Gulf War One, I never saw somebody in public become more expansive and more powerful than Bush during that period.
Right.
Like, this was a guy that knew he was stepping into his destiny. Like, this is what he was there for. This is what all those years in the CIA and Skull and Bones and all the dirty work that they were involved with, this is what it was all leading to. And Zelensky has that kind of feel to him. He's got that, that I'm expanding, I'm getting bigger, I'm getting more powerful with each passing day. And why is that? Well, because all this emotional energy is being poured into him.
Right.
Think about that. I mean, that's a huge amplification in all this sympathy and all this empathy and, all this devotion and love. What's it going to do to an individual? I mean, that's going to impact that person.
Exactly. Well, I thought it'd be interesting. I pulled up his chart for people to see because I think it's you bring up an interesting point about if he could be the Antichrist. And there's a couple things that I always like to look at, and like one of them is like, it's so interesting to see that he has a lot of this Leo in his chart, right? And we're in this opposite time, so he's very this opposite kind of energy that he's trying to do. But the main things here is one, this Jupiter Neptune conjunction we're about to have here in Pisces, which is once, in every 165 years, basically, since the last one was 1856. It's happening in his 11th, if I use Placidus here, but he is a Gemini rising, so it's squaring his rising exactly. And to me, that's a kind of a weird thing, because that means we're not really seeing who we're really seeing. It's also going to square his Jupiter there. And so there's a lot of these weird aspects that I'm kind of like, I don't know. And you know what I feel like running, since you just said that, is I'm like, does this guy have, I look at people's Lucifer to see like how, if we're going to really talk about that point, I don't know if you ever run that in anybody's charts, but
no, this is a new trick for me.
Oh yes. So you can run Lucifer in somebody's chart, and let's see where his is at. His is at 25 Sag on the galactic center.
Whoa.
7th house right here.
That's a huge placement on the galactic center.
I know.
Wow.
Oh, so I think I just wanted to bring that up to people. It's also interesting seeing that he's about to go through his nodal flip, right? Like the nodes are, of course, coming into Aries next year, but he also has Chiron and Taurus. And to me, in the 11th house, it's like this guy is having his moment here of wanting to have the world love this guy, and he doesn't actually feel that he's worthy of it. And this maybe, I mean, he'll take a war to do it. It's kind of weird to me. And he has Sun square Chiron. He's got Venus, and he's also got a combust Sun Venus too, which is kind of interesting because with Mars retrograde at 0 Leo, I mean, he doesn't have a normal chart, right? Like his chart got a lot of karmic weird shit going on.
Yep. Yeah,
and
absolutely. And even like Black Moon Lilith in his first house, which tends to be, Cancer is going to be nurturing and comforting. And you can even kind of see that he's got that kind of roundish face.
Well, yeah, and he's got Jupiter in that first. Yeah. It's
but the Black Moon Lilith part in Cancer would be fairly deceptive in a lot of ways, right? It's shadowy.
Yeah.
Like the intention around receiving
we're actually seeing Black Moon Lilith like been hanging around Taurus and coming into Gemini, but as you see it, it's on his rising as we're speaking right now.
Interesting.
Right. So it's coming back for a return here just in the next, I think, week, actually. And there's something coming up here in the next week with what all these, look at already in 1 week, it's at 11. So like there's these meetings that we just had with the G7, the NATO, and there was a UN meeting all on the same day yesterday. That's not a coincidence. There's something about to go down here.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And even with that Black Moon Lilith, it's also, Cancer is a sign that's very protective, right? It's about defending. And what is the narrative around him? That he's defending his people, and he's out on the streets, and he's Volodymyr Rambo, right? But it's the black moon, and so we're not really seeing the full story. We're seeing like this projection of the shadow in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting aspect that he
Well,
has. It's a program he's
yeah,
got
because
running.
look at his return is coming here on March 28th, which is Monday. Also, this Saturn Venus conjunction is on his midheaven on that same day with the moon crossing it. That's going to be happening on Monday. And then here's Mars about to come in that 10th house, which is a big moment in someone's life.
So yeah,
with Saturn conjuncting,
Right.
and the nodes are squaring his midheaven.
So the Saturn thing has got to be war, right?
It's going to be something big. That's what I'm saying is they're trying to play that like this thing is going to. Did you see some of the media today? It was like, oh yeah, Putin's just going to. He just wants the Donbass region, and he's looking like he's going to back out. And the Russian people are the Russian troops are turning on each other and killing their own, higher up generals and commanders. I'm like, we have to remind people that Jupiter and Neptune, which are right here in Pisces, this is the biggest propaganda moment of our lives.
Oh yeah.
Because it hasn't happened since 1856. And in 1856, it was propaganda about the Civil War. It was what caused the Civil War. Was 1856.
Right. The other thing too, I'm big into Tartaria, and that's when a lot of these World's Fairs are happening, and during the 1850s. So these World's Fairs are they're like these symbols of like some other world and some other civilization that existed, prior to like 18. The world really turns in 1850. Like in 1850, Uranus goes into Taurus, and then Pluto, which is in Aries, is right behind it. And something happens right around that 1850 period. And we have the gold rush in California and this whole.
Oh yeah, it was Neptune coming into Pisces.
Neptune's in
being
Pisces.
discovered. It was Neptune also being discovered. I mean, it was wild.
Right. So we have two of those elements right now. We have Neptune and Pisces. We have Uranus and Taurus. And if you go back and you look at the time, and I've talked about this flip that likely took place was a reset. They had a reset. Right. Here we are again. We're in reset territory. So, to your point,
look at that. Mars is going to oppose his moon too on Monday. I mean, there's something coming.
So I do think that if they needed to, they could run a script where it looks like Russia is taking an L on this thing, but they're really going to give in to Russia. They could run that script. I've looked at that. That has some probability. Russia gets what it wants. And then Zolensky is the hero. And it's sort of like this weird save face moment. And then they kind of move on from that, because you got to pay attention to what's happening in China now.
Right.
In China, they've got another outbreak of some other, mutant monkey virus or something. Right. So they could crank that thing up again if they want to. So I think that that's in play potentially for this whole operation in Ukraine, but it could also move into a more dominant, action-oriented military style conflict. It could potentially go kinetic, and especially when Mars returns in May. When Mars comes into Aries in May, like Mars has not been visible in the night sky since October, and it's coming back, on that balsamic moon in Aries.
I know.
Right? It's just getting ready to flip that moon, right? So, oh man, it's going to be.
I wanted to, you had brought up a good point. You did a live. It was a couple months ago, and I was in the chat for it. But showing people the Jupiter Saturn cycle of like 2000 to help them understand, in May of 2000, right? We had the Jupiter Saturn that was happening in Taurus that was of course in square to Uranus in Aquarius, right? So they happen at 22 degrees and into 23 degrees. And it's weird that here's Mars and Saturn about to start squaring that point, and then Saturn starting to square that Jupiter Saturn here at 22 Taurus.
Right.
And now we're so the 20-year cycle from 2000 to 2020 ended, but we are now about to really kind of have the gears clunk in of this new 20-year cycle with the square that's coming. Especially it was Uranus that was squaring Saturn, like we're in now, just flipped signs. And now we're gonna see some really harsh aspects here of the North Node gonna conjunct this point in transit. So that like everything, like it's not gonna just be just like a normal week to 2 weeks coming up here. It's gonna be intense, especially with Jupiter and Neptune meeting up by April 12th. And then as you bring up, Mars coming back in the sky. And when Mars comes back into Aries, the last time we had Mars in Aries, it was a whole retrograde at the end of 2020, the same retrograde that caused Pearl Harbor. The last time that Mars had retrograde fully through Aries in 2020 was the last time was in 1941.
Right. And we had the Summer of Floyd. We basically had a purple revolution take place in the streets of America. It was their version of a regime change, which I believe took place, by the way.
I know it's very interesting because you had brought up, I'm going to get off this chair right now, but you had brought up so much about, like looking at the old Jupiter Saturn and then seeing Saturn as it will square that point, but it's getting Mars at the same time too.
Right.
And to me, I'm just kind of like, oh man, this is going to get intense looking at Zielinski's chart, even looking at Biden's chart. Saturn's about to wreak havoc on him.
I think again, I have some very different ideas about who Biden or what Biden is.
Right.
But if we're just looking at his chart and looking at the South Node coming in, and at some point it's gonna hit his sun. What's his sun at? Like, is it 5 or 6 Scorpio? Is that where his sun is?
Oh no, he's a little later.
Because he's going to have that South Node on his sun in the 12th house, and I think that's where the exit for Biden is. That's my sense, right? Like,
right,
takes him right out of the 12th house, right out of the 12th house, right out of the chart, and I think either then or shortly thereafter, would have to be shortly thereafter, it'd be Kamala time. Because I think that, again, if we're just running the chart, I think I think this is a chart that's reaching its expiration date.
Well, and I think, it's funny because there's a lot of people out there, of course, who really are questioning so much, like, and I always say it like Biden's America or everything, like let's go Brandon's come out or all this stuff. But like, I don't people think that, especially if you look at America's Pluto at 27, it's not. I mean, I guess you could say it's Biden kind of the Trojan horse bringing in Kamala Harris because her chart's the one that directly impacts that Pluto return coming. And the Democratic Party's chart, their own natal Uranus is 27 Capricorn on that Pluto.
So the South Node is on Biden's sun. And it's going to hit his Mercury, which is at 21 fairly soon. So he's got this transit of the South Node through his 12th house, and he has Mars in Scorpio. I'm wondering if it's going to be that Mars, because he has Mars. He's got a Mars Pluto square in his chart. So I wonder if it's going to be when that South Node hits his Mars.
Yeah, because it's really interesting looking at his chart because he is getting to this really kind of weird point here. Looking at his sun being at 27, right? All these 27s. And that South Node's been there, but here's Saturn going to station at 25. But he's also a Sun-Venus combust like Zolinsky. Mercury's been going under havoc, of course, with his mind and so forth. And his Mars, too, has been in terrible placement. It's at 12 degrees. Uranus is exactly opposing his Mars. Like, there's not much more time left for this guy. I mean, literally, that's what I'm saying. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if within the next 2 weeks with Jupiter, Neptune, with all the aspects coming to the old Jupiter Saturn conjunction, to, as you were just bringing up, that we're coming into the eclipses too, that are going to be at 10 degrees, and then that lunar eclipse at 25. I mean, this is going to go
lunar eclipse
wild.
That lunar eclipse will be on his sun, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Check out. Bye-bye.
So that's also being eclipsed by a feminine energy.
Yeah.
A dark,
and he's got that Venus combustion.
Yeah.
And you know, it's interesting because I've looked at his chart so much. Like, he's a Sag rising, and his ruler of his ascendant's Jupiter, and he has it in Cancer. It was actually a great place, but it's retrograde, and it's never progressed direct ever. He was born just days after it went retrograde.
Interesting.
So it's like I kind of feel for the guy, like, as a soul, like, this guy just really always wanted to have him be the guy that everybody knew, right? Like, he tried so hard. I mean, if we're even going to go into the Supreme Court thing right now, like, he was the one who was in 2005 on the TV being like, oh yeah, we're not going to not, because the Republicans had put up another black woman for to be Supreme Court justice, and he turned it down himself. He's the one who made it happen. So
that's right. Yeah, he did.
Right. So it's like really weird on how it's like his Jupiter in the 8th, which with Pluto in the 8th, to be honest with you, I don't like that. That scares me a little bit. But the thing that's coming here is there's too much about to happen here. And I think the best way for people to prepare is not to be afraid, but just know that the changing of this new guard is definitely happening in front of your face. And Jupiter and Neptune right now can definitely make you kind of numb to things, or just kind of, oh, everything's going to be okay. The world's getting a little better, and da, 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 da. And then out of nowhere, like, you know, if you weren't paying attention, you know, boom. And that Aries energy that we're in definitely can really hit people with this new moon on Chiron that's coming. I mean, there's too much stuff here in the next week to 2 weeks that is going to be intense, and it's going to definitely wake people up. And it's looking at, I wouldn't even be surprised too if they try and pull off some weird thing with Zolensky, as far as like him being captured, or like they're trying to find a way to go to war with Russia. Like, they got to find every way they can. And we're at that point where I don't think people realize, like, any wrong move by any wrong situation, just like the smallest little thing, just triggers all this in the wrong direction.
Well, we're in the fog of war, and I think it's really, really hard for people to get a true sense as to what's going on. I mean, you know, you have that guy coming over from England. What was his name? Les Luthor, walking around Ukraine, and just say, hey, look, you know, we got a stage set here, and the reason why it looks like all these people are having a hard time getting out, well, they've basically constructed the lines so the lines look more congested. You know, it's not really people, they're just riding the train and they're going somewhere, but they've got all these cameras and they've got all these film crews that are hanging around Ukraine. So, and
his video was mind-blowing, right?
Yeah.
Like, flying there and just the whole time keeping his camera on, walking the streets, and he's like, nothing's happening.
Right. That doesn't mean that there aren't things happening.
Right. Exactly.
You know, so we're in this weird place now where reality is synthetic. Right. There's this simulacra of reality. And then there's these things that are happening that are impacting and affecting people's lives. And so it's really hard to untangle the details and get facts and truth when we're in this phase, which is a very, very Neptunian phase.
Yeah.
Super
Neptunian. Extreme Neptune.
Yeah. So I wanted to actually talk a little bit about Neptune. And
yeah, please.
Because one of the things that's happening with this whole global drama that we've been, I think we could say that we've been inducted into this global drama, I would say 2020, when we went into COVID, right? That's when the global drama started. Saturn was in Aquarius, and we had that clamp down, that lockdown from the high priest of science. So we've been in this global space, this collective space, for really the last 2 years. We just came through it on March 13th. So what happens is that people have their attention drawn into the sphere of global events.
Yeah.
And it's this roller coaster. I was using this this symbol of this roller coaster, the idea of this roller coaster, on this roller coaster ride, which is very Aquarian too, right? When you look at roller coasters, they have waves.
Yeah.
They have these little, right? They're waves. They go up and they go down.
Corkscrews and
Yeah, right. But the ride is supposed to end at some point. And what's happening is we pull in and we think we're going to get out of the roller coaster, but we keep going. And so we're on this extended roller coaster ride, which isn't always really fun. But the reason why it's not fun is because our attention is grabbed by this collective signal, which is very Piscean. And it's really emotional, right? It's emotionally based, whether it's what's going on in Ukraine and how we're feeling for the Ukrainians, or, and how we're feeling for Zelensky. And on the flip side, this animus that we have towards Putin. These are all very emotionally driven kinds of interactions with the collective. And I would put this out there that has nothing to do with spirituality, right? Like, this is, I think, the challenge of our times, because we're so dialed in to what's happening out there. And it's really happening out there now, because it's happening halfway across the world, that it's taking us away from the spiritual potential that we have. And I feel like this is going to be our challenge. Like, how can we surf and navigate through these times and understand what's happening at a collective level? But at the same time, how do we tap into a deeper spirituality that really transcends that shit? Because that is not who we are. That's just a Skinner box, right? That's just a Skinner box experiment. So we have to figure out how we can transcend what's happening, right? This is, I think, our biggest task. And, I don't want to get into it right now, but I had this idea of the near-death experience. I had a guest on my show today, and we were talking about consciousness and how, when you have a near-death experience, you have the people that talk about it in a positive sense have this idea or this feeling that they still exist, right? Like, there's an I there, but the I is everywhere, right? They are everything, but they still have this localized experience, right? And I thought to myself, this is what we need, right? We need to move into that place where we have a localized relationship with our consciousness, but we also have this wider objective field that we're part of at the same time. And so I thought about this, and I'm thinking, well, maybe what we need is we need a near-death experience, right? Like, as a culture, we need a near-death. Now, I do think that because these people who are very good at manipulating emotions and information and technology, that they could, if they wanted to, they could script getting us up to 11:59:59, right? And we're right there, and we're at the final seconds of planetary extinction, which is in some ways us feeling like we're at the end. Like, people are looking at each other like, oh my God, we're seeing our past rush before our eyes. And then they pull it back. And it's like, okay, we just gave you that. And now we're going to come together as a world, and we're going to have a much better world, and we're going to have this new system, and it's never going to happen again, right? It's never going to happen again. All those bad men and all those bad things, we're going to put them away. And guess what? You're going to be able to have all these things that you want, need. The only thing is, you have to give everything up, and you'll have nothing, and you'll love it, right? You'll be happy. So there's that. That to me is the indoctrination or the initiation into the dark new age, where they simulate that near-death experience. What was that movie with Kiefer Sutherland and Julia Roberts? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Where they simulate they like.
Yes. It was called where they would actually like bring them back to life.
Right.
It was such a good movie. I love that. I forgot about that movie. I used to love watching that movie.
Yeah,
it was called something simple. It was like a one name. It was called like
what was it? What was it? Oh, my assistant producer said she had the name. You're gonna look it up now. Flatliners.
Flatliners. That was it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
that was such a, okay. Everybody's in the chat now saying it. I was like, oh,
so
man.
what we need collectively, and not socially orchestrated, engineered, we need a collective flatliner moment, right? That's what we need, because that's going to allow us to have this experience of ourselves still localized, but way bigger, right? Way bigger. And that kind of consciousness is ultimately, that's our, that's our elixir. That's where we
and that's really Jupiter Neptune, right? Because Neptune's realm is boundaryless. Like there's no boundaries. And then Jupiter is overinflating those boundaryless energies to the max. So it is pushing it across the whole entire, beyond the universe, right? Into the divine at the same time. And there's a boomerang effect too with Pisces, right? Like in Neptune's energy. And so it's like I love how you bring up how where I think as individuals been going through this very flatlining, isolated kind of feeling, even if things are open, right? Like it's no matter if things are open or not open, there is this feeling that's been going on, that's been slowly been building really since Neptune came into Pisces at the beginning of the 2010s. I mean, that's like, that it's reaching its peak here, and it's going to take this kind of moment for people to kind of, some people call it their come to Jesus moment, however you want to put it. Right. It is that moment here, but it could be used in such bad ways. I mean, in 1856, it was, I laugh because people think that the political propaganda is so bad now. I'm like, this is nothing compared to the 1856, putting up a slave and shoving down Lincoln down the throat of a free soiler and using the N-word. And like, it was really bad. And there was Bleeding Kansas, which was an they always say, America's never had, voter fraud. It's like, yeah, they did in Kansas. And that's the reason that caused a civil war, a free state that had a bunch of border ruffians from Nebraska, from the Kansas-Nebraska Act, that came over, double voted to make it slave state, and caused a huge war between free soilers and people that wanted slavery. And then the governor, there was too much blood on the hands, and that he knew that the election results weren't real, but he went with it anyway because he didn't want to cause any more bloodshed. And that reminds me of the 2020 election.
Right. Absolutely. I think it's a great call.
And it's the same astrology.
Yeah.
It was actually Neptune at the same degree as the 2020 election as what we saw with Bleeding Kansas. And so it could be used in the wrong ways. And I think the flatline moment in the 1850s was this kind of realization of there's the South. And I don't think it's an irony that just even this year, Robert E. Lee's statue gets taken down, and then they find a time capsule, and then they bring out the time capsule. And did you see how many Mason? It was like 85% Mason documents that was in there. Right. And then if you read his journals to his wife in 1856, being like, it's the same thing we saw with this whole, we'll just keep it the thing, the CV thing. He was writing how, us in the South, we know better of what to do for slaves. We know how to make their lives better for them. We know what they need. They don't know how to do it. It's exactly how you're seeing the medical tyranny that's going on in this world. And they're still throwing that in this whole thing, that they'll give you moments where they take it away and then they throw it back in your face. And then they're doing that with the war now. So they're getting you kind of, it's a military tactic, right? It's like cornering you and slowly taking away your stuff. Now they're threatening you with food shortages, and then the gas prices. And then,
by the way, the gas thing is Piscean and Neptunian.
Correct. I mean, the last time, right, with Jupiter Uranus, we had the big BP oil spill, or I think it was the BP one that was in the Gulf, right? There was that one. Right. There's all these. It always is. Every time you get with oil or gasoline, it's Pisces, especially with Jupiter there. And then you got Neptune here, though. And I wouldn't be surprised in the next 2 weeks either if we see it go crazier in price. Like
Yeah.
that's just like where we're at. But I feel like there's this military kind of assault on people that they're not even waking up to with the propaganda. I mean, that's what they do, right? When you go into a country, you take away the people's power, you take away their ability to communicate the way that you want to. You take away, and then you find the people that will kind of get on your team and go against other people. And you do that's what we did in Iraq. Like that's a but it's being used against all the Western countries now in the world. And it's really kind of a moment for people to, and I'm just going to say it. It's just really hard for me to see people like fall for it and kind of want to, and that's what Stalin did. Stalin laughed at all the people that got him into power. The first people that went into his camps were the people who got him into power because he thought they were weak. Like you just screwed up.
Right. Exactly.
You fell for it. People
Yeah.
don't realize that's actually the history.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Can you do a screen share? Can I get a screen share here? I'm gonna put something up. Is that possible?
Oh yeah. Let me whatever you need, Robert Phoenix here.
We're gonna stay on this Neptune, this
allow
Pisces
multi-pin. I mean, you think you can just share?
Let me try it.
I mean, I'll make you a host.
Disabled participant screen sharing. You locking me out, bro.
Is it locking you out?
No, I'm just messing around. It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Allow. Really?
Here, if that's not going to work.
No, I'll be able to get it. But
if it's not going to work, I'll give you a link. I'll put it in the chat.
No. Oh, here, I got you. You're good.
Okay.
You're good. I don't use Zoom much. I'm always on my live stream studio, but there we go.
Okay. So this is a way for me to pump my webinar tomorrow on the Sabian symbols, which I'm doing.
Perfect.
So I love the Sabian symbols, and I enjoy, for the most part, Dane Rudhyar's interpretation of the Sabian symbols. And he's got a very complex system of cycles and subcycles. It's really fascinating stuff. So I was looking at the Sabian symbols for these degrees of Pisces, which is where we're moving now, right?
Right.
And usually what happens with the symbols is that they take place in these triads. So we're coming up out of this really interesting symbol, which is 21 Pisces. Check this out. Under the watchful and kind eye of a Chinese servant, a girl fondles a little white lamb. So Rudhyar's interpretation of the symbol, I don't think it's bad, but I think there's some interesting things here that are kind of paradoxical and ironic. So the idea behind this is that this girl represents this purity, this innocence, and she has somebody who's watching over her, who's faithful, who's connected to a very different tradition, and a very different, in some ways, consciousness and time. But the last paragraph is interesting. He says, this is the first symbol of the 71st sequence. It brings together past and future, an overlapping of levels. The Chinese kindly watching over the girl, fondling the white lamb. There is charm and ingenuousness in this scene, a vision of white hope, a hope for a future that can only be felt almost naively, right? So when I read that, I'm like, wow, this is kind of interesting, because for a long time, China has performed this role, right, of the servant over, oh, don't worry about it, boss. We can bring you this stuff really cheap, boss, right? No problem, right? So we've been getting these things, right? They've been playing this role, and it's we've been incredibly naive through this whole process, right? So this girl symbolizes the naivete, and we're living in this inverted time. Of course, everything's inverted. So this symbol of white hope it's archaic, right? If anything, there's no such thing as white hope right now. Like anything that even resembles white can't even be associated with hope. So
right, even like just like the light, right? Like it's like people are like, yeah, I don't know, there's a lot of people ironically, who are kind of on that other side right now, that don't believe in God or any kind of white light or any kind of positivity or any kind of, because it's always white and dark. Or even in
Right.
this thing, it says the white lamb suggests the sign of all beginnings, Aries.
Right. Yes, absolutely. So this is a really interesting symbol, and this is where this is where Neptune's been kind of hanging out, right? The next two symbols are fascinating. It moves into this kind of prophetic and transcendent quality of Pisces. So Pisces 22, a prophet carrying tablets of the new law, is walking down the slopes of Mount Sinai. The need to bring down to the level of everyday existence the clear realizations made manifest in a great peak experience. So I think what we should be looking at here is interpreting these symbols at a collective level through inversion.
Right.
Because that's what we've been inducted into, which happened during the Gemini nodal cycle. Everything got flipped and inverted. So when I look at this and I see this, it's like, okay, what was Joe Biden talking about yesterday? Right? Seems like yesterday, the new world order.
Right. Yeah.
We have to take the lead in the new world order. This is the new law that is theoretically descending. The symbol obviously refers to Moses after received from the God of his people the basic principles upon which a new religion and even more a new ritual of living should be founded. The basic law has to be brought down. It represents a descent of formative and structuring power, a divine revelation. What are we looking at now? We're looking at the Supreme Court justice who's engaged in law, right? And these whole ideas and concepts that are fundamental. What's a woman? When does when does the human life begin? I mean, these are theoretically very big questions for anybody that's going to sit in that seat, right? So we're dealing with this idea of law, but it's in this
right. While at the same time, Justice Thomas is in the hospital, which we're not getting any info from. They won't give it out.
They say he's been released. By the way, that's Piscean, right? The hospital's a Piscean territory. So, but what we're seeing here, and it's weird because Ketanji Brown Jackson is a Virgo, and she's answering these questions like she's a freaking Pisces, right? They're obtuse, they're very open-ended. I can't go there. There's this whole cloud over her rulings around these pedophiles. I'm sorry, but there's a record where she was always sentenced below the
prosecution and by what was set by Congress back in the day.
Recommended,
so it's two versions.
That's right. She's been under the bar for every single one of those cases. So that, that's drawing some scrutiny, but at the same time, what are we seeing? We're saying, oh, well, look, she's being victimized. These people are just giving her a hard time. This is the kind of Piscean model of, the martyr and the scapegoat. So we're seeing a lot of this take place, and it does have to do with law. So this, and then look at here, the keyword mandate is appropriate, but the basic problem is how to fulfill it in the right spirit, right? So now we have mandates sort of floating around again. And we just dealt with the whole mandate thing. And again, let's go to the previous symbol. Hello. We've got China, right? And what's going on in China right now? They're locking down again.
And it was Mercury in Pisces 2020 that China locked down and announced the weird stuff going on in February into March of 2020. Yep. So if you kind of have to look at what's China doing, it's kind of always bouncing back to what's happening here around the world, right? And they're also closing, they're bottlenecked more than ever. And what's weird is everything from when you brought up the New World Order that Biden just brought up, I looked up FDR's speech in 1940, right before we got into World War I, and he talked about how it was the axis of evil, and Hitler talking about their new order that we're not going to be, we're going to say no to. Also about we need to make sure that we supply our friends UK with all the equipment and war equipment that they need.
That's right. Yep.
And he
Absolutely.
also said it's crazy because something's about to go down because but it's all inverted. Now it's whenever a country says they're going to be the new world order, it does not go good for them.
Right. That's a great point. That's an
like even
excellent
FDR
point.
did not say that. Like he was not trying. He just said we need to just think about the defense of America, which it's weird that this whole entire time over the last month, you hear nothing from Biden or any of the American, any part of America, of any part of our institutions talking about the defense and just worrying about America. It's worried about what will happen to Ukraine. What will happen to Ukraine? What will happen to Ukraine? What will happen to Ukraine? And then when it comes to anything about us, whether it is, of course, the gas prices, or especially they're talking so much about nukes, it's just like, oh yeah, but whatever, no big deal. Like, are you what? Excuse me? Like, no attention to that at all. Like no, and also being naive and pushing the dragon. And then even yesterday, Biden said when they asked him directly about President Xi about what is he going to do, and he's like, well, I think he said, I think, and I'm unsure, but I think because he does so much business with the West, he's going to pick the right side. It's like you have no assurance of any of that at all, and you're touting it to make people very Piscean, right? Like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so people just stop kind of talking about it more.
Right. Exactly. So the inverted thing as it relates to the Pluto return is really interesting because the Pluto return is being played out in Ukraine.
It is.
Yeah. It's being played out in Ukraine. They're projecting this Pluto return, which is this declaration of independence. I swear to God, I heard
rebel soldiers that are normal people.
Exactly, right? They've scripted this thing for freaking Ukraine. It's like the Pluto return on Mars. I mean, this is like this weird version of Total Recall Pluto return.
Yeah.
And I heard some talking head, he freaking compared Zelensky to Washington. Okay, that's how much this Pluto return is being inverted and projected onto Ukraine. I've actually seen Ukrainian t-shirts that have the Gadsden flag in Ukrainian freaking colors. Like, don't tread on me with Ukrainian colors. And of course, it's okay for Ukraine to wear those shirts.
Yeah, but here you can't.
Right, here we can't. Like, so there's this weird, like, I feel like we're in this like Star Trek episode. Really, that's how this inversion thing has really flipped the world. When Star Trek would show up on another timeline, it'd go back to a version of Earth that wasn't Earth.
Right.
Some other reality.
Or Sliders. That show Sliders.
Yeah, man.
Favorite.
So we're seeing this weird thing getting played out with the Pluto, but the Pluto return is happening. It's happening here.
Well, and it deals with time, Pluto and Capricorn, right? And the destruction of it and the change of it. And even, people have been talking about the Higgs, collider and the new version of Smash. They're bringing out bigger versions of it. But then you have to think of with all this weird Aquarian stuff, like, are they messing with the time? I mean, look at, they just said in Congress, a bipartisan. Yeah. Like, in the Senate, let's get rid of
let's
changing our time. Like they're messing with the time, literally in your face. They're telling you, but behind that, with you got to look at always the behind with all the Piscean stuff. It's behind the curtain always. That means they're playing with the time literally.
That's right,
and they are literally messing with the time, but they are messing with it deeper too.
Yep.
I mean, even our founding fathers were messing with it at the same time too, like that because they were Masons and they knew even like when to draft the documents in a time, and we're using astrology in the Farmer's Almanac, and that was like the first time any government or any kind of, because John Dee was under Queen Elizabeth I, but and he was the one who created the idea of the British Empire. He was literally an astrologer.
Right, the court astrologer,
right?
Magician.
So and that was 1560s, and it's like really weird though that it was finally America that form that was playing with this kind of new time and this kind of new magic behind things, and there's that happening now. And there's that, but it's weird though, because that was also leaving, but it's the same thing, right? Ukraine and Russia are really, it's like Russia's kind of like Britain, right? And then Ukraine's kind of trying to be like America. It's the same thing.
Yep. So it's this is such a fascinating conversation, because now Putin is Hitler, but he's also King George.
Yeah, he's King George. That's what I was gonna say.
And he's Hitler at the same time, right? I mean, so we have these weird timelines colliding, and
well, in the astrology, we are in the same. Uranus Taurus says World War II, right? Build up. We're in Pluto Capricorn Revolutionary War. We're in Neptune Pisces Civil War, right? So it's like they're all connecting at the same time, astrologically. Plus,
yeah. I mean, so
that's the crazy part.
So. Okay, I want to come back to that. Just bookmark that, because there's something I want to relate that to. But I want to finish out this.
Yeah, because that 23 is where the conjunction is going to happen, and just what's today, the 25th, like 2.5 weeks.
So a materializing medium giving a seance, the ability to give one's own vital energy to substantiate one's conscious ideals or unconscious desires. This is where it gets interesting. The person who believes he or she has a mission or a mandate, there's that word again, mandate, or any special gift that can be of value to his community, must substantiate his belief. He has to produce results. Sometimes this involves difficulties and special conditions or circumstances. It always demands, to some extent, the gift of some power or value, which is deeply one's own. The thought of sacrifice was suggested by the white lamb in the first symbol of this fivefold series. Something precious involved in a deeply personal experience has to be surrendered, offered to others. So Rudyard is talking about a sacrifice. He's talking about a sacrifice as part of this psychic transubstantiated operation. Okay. So let's keep going here a little bit. The medium's psychic substance provides the material made visible in the phenomena. If the latter are genuine, after the seance, the medium is usually exhausted. The performer gives of his very life to the performance. Isn't that interesting? So, okay, let's take this back to Zolensky, the actor.
I know. I was just going to go there. I think I'm going to be.
Are they going to martyr Zolensky?
That's are they sacrificing him? Looking at his transits, I wouldn't be surprised.
That would actually, now, would they actually really martyr him, or would he just like go hang out in Antarctica or someplace like that? I don't know.
Who knows? But they're. With the performer, he's willing. The guy was an actor about being a president, and then became the president right after that movie 2 years later.
Look at that line. The performer gives of his very life to the performance.
Well, and that it's a sacrifice that must be made. That's personal experience has to be surrendered and offered to others.
Right.
Which, if you think of the meetings and you see how he's no longer in the palace anymore, he's right. Like you just see him like doing this whole sacrifice, getting the world all obsessed. I don't know if you saw, but I just recently posted some really weird thing about, the GMI, and the colors are for all the ads for the last, year and a half have been blue and gold, the same colors as Ukraine.
Yeah.
They're programming in that way. That's Jupiter, Neptune too. And that's a seance. That's also a magician kind of playing around with stuff. But with the sacrifice here, they don't need Russia to really go do some other thing, because they can't do anything anyway because it's Ukraine, right? So what do they need? They need something that gets the hearts and the minds of people to give them reasoning to go do something crazy, which would be Zelensky being sacrificed in a weird way.
Right. Exactly.
Because that's all they did when he spoke to Congress. Everybody's like, God, do you hear the spirit in him and how driven he is? And let's send him more guns. I'm like, the The Democrats are saying send him more guns.
The dude is probably at a club in Miami on a green screen.
That's what I'm saying. He's in a white wall. They probably got him in a little 1-bedroom apartment somewhere. I mean,
I think he's probably doing a little bit better than that. But I mean, yeah. I mean, I think that this is a very plausible scenario because when you look at what happens with wars, particularly world wars, there's that
World War
key
One
event.
was about an assassination.
Absolutely, it was Archduke Ferdinand,
Yes.
and that triggers the whole thing, right? And then World War II has, for the Germans, it starts with they're moving into Poland, right? It's an incursion into a new territory, and they said that they weren't going to go there. So that's where it starts for the Germans. Where it starts for everybody else, they have a different starting line. For the United States, it's Pearl Harbor, right? So we have these events that thrust us into these things, which for all intents and purposes, and I don't think the Archduke Ferdinand was a false flag. I think that guy popped him.
Right.
Because the fall of the Habsburgs in Austro-Hungary Empire, like that happened. Like those people.
Yeah, and back then they were an old time. They just did it. Like, I'm doing it.
Well, I mean, and so that I believe was really the true trigger. But you look at these other events, like even the Reichstag, right? That's another false flag.
Right.
Essentially the Germans set this thing on fire. And okay, well, here we go.
It's like January 6th.
We're going all in with the National Socialism. So we have these events that trigger these wars. The same thing happened with Vietnam, the Gulf of Tonkin. I've talked about this, right? Total false flag.
And where was there a big volcano under the water just recently? Like there's some weird stuff going on. There's too much weird stuff that you got to look. Why is all this stuff going on? Or like, why does Britain after World War II finally have a navy again, a full fleet navy that can actually do and send a whole entire fleet across the ocean? That hasn't happened. Or why is now Germany putting their GDP to let's build up our military, and then just made a deal with Biden today about getting natural energy, like natural gas and energy, and saying that they want to be energy independent and they want to be focusing on Germany again. So that's always a sign.
Right. So
I'm like,
England's had a navy. They launched their navy to devastating effect down in the Falkland Islands when they had that war. But to your point, they're firing it back up again.
Right. And, because it was just, I think within the last year, there was like the first time they've sent a full fleet, like a full, I think it was
the Falklands was the last time they did that.
Yeah.
Actually.
It's been so long, and it's like weird that they're coming out, and it's like what America, and even under Trump, right? July 4th in 2019 was the big, hey, look at what's going on, right? At the Capitol building and everything, right? All the tanks and all the fighter jets and everything. And then you don't see anything like that. We see this Afghanistan thing happen, which was green screen, because I was in the Navy. There's no way all those people were running next to that DC big plane like that. There's no way. Those are jet engines. Like, you would be sucked up into them, right? Yep. And the chaos that they show with that, right? There's like, that makes no sense. And then now you don't see our power. It's almost like they're propagating that we're weak, but really I feel like they're not weak. It's almost like a weird, they're playing with everything and making people fall for things in such easy ways, and people fall for it. Like,
that's the emotional roller coaster, right? Yep. That's the up and down. That's the waves of Aquarius. And the challenging part is to get off the roller coaster or not be subjected to those waves, because everything that they've been doing is just hijacking our freaking potential, right?
Yeah.
I mean, let's say, for instance, we are lined up for something really interesting to happen galactically. Maybe it's the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction. And we could have this potential of people having this, near-death experience and realizing that they are who they are, but they're much bigger than that. Everybody having that simultaneously. Oh my God. I mean, that would be the thing, right? But they could hijack that, just like they hijack these moments in time where, and I've seen this with these Saturn cycles in Aquarius. You go back to like 1963, Kennedy dies, and there was this interesting ripple effect that Kennedy was having. He gave that great speech in Germany. He was the first global president, was JFK. He was the first TV president. And I feel like he had some very interesting plans that he was going to put into play. And they took him out, right? They took him out, and we have Saturn in Aquarius. And so we have this oneness, but it's this oneness in grief, right? It's this oneness in sorrow. It's this oneness in heaviness. So that takes place. Then you fast forward and we go to the next Saturn in Aquarius moment. It's the Gulf War.
I know. Right away, right at the beginning.
Right at the beginning. And we're coming out of the 80s. The world, right? The world theoretically is moving towards some level of unification. 94, officially Russia will have it, right? Will have its thing. We have
recession energy was around the same way. Like, you know what I mean? It's like all the,
but we were having these global festivals, right? Like these major global festivals and satellite, and it's connecting up the world. It's connecting up everybody, like Live Aid, and that's happening during the 80s. We have the harmonic convergence. So we're headed, right? We're headed towards this potential for this opening, just like we were headed for this potential for this opening with Kennedy. And then bam, the Gulf War happens and we're hijacked again. We're brought into a global event, but it's the coalition of the willing, 1,000 points of light, right? So
that was also the military that got their experimental GMI that caused suffering.
That's right. That was
forever.
Brutal. A lot of people don't remember Gulf War syndrome. It was horrible.
It was horrible. And it was because they were saying, oh, there's chemical weapons there, and we got to use this new GMI for the military to go there. And if you look up how many soldiers have died from it and the millions that were injured from it, it's insane.
And the injuries are incredibly severe. And not only that, but they were able, unfortunately, it was transmissible. And so their spouses were getting a lot of their symptoms. And it was through intercourse, right?
Right.
So it was horrible.
There's a lot of questions about that right now, too.
Oh, absolutely. That's true.
But, like that. And that's the other thing, right? This whole Piscean thing is how do you move the direction like a magician does, right? Like we're talking about like let's say a Penn and Teller magician, not like a spiritual magician, right? Like, how do you make the audience see something to really move the attention away from the trick that you're really doing, right? So it's like, all the information about what's really going on with the CV thing. Oh, wait, no, you need to pay attention to Ukraine right now. You need to pay attention to food shortage. You need to pay your gas now. You know, do that while all this stuff is being released and not being talked about, Right. It's like that's what they're doing in every way. It becomes to where it reminds me of a House of Cards too, because it's like the confidence of the Capricorn transit of 2020 and the great conjunction of Saturn Pluto. And then now it's the Piscean, just, I got to figure it out. And there's an old in it, and people get triggered sometimes when I talk about this astrologer, but Aleister Crowley, in one of his astrology books in the late 1890s, he wrote about Neptune and as the great outpost to, the fortress, right? Like this outpost past the fortress that is intuitively feeling what's coming in, but it also at the same time is very isolated and lonely because it looks out and just doesn't see anything. But it also is the faint sounds of the angelic hymns and the harps that you can sense, but you can't fully hear. He has a lot of really good ways, but he says that Neptune is going to be okay for people to do backdoor meetings. They get their hall pass, but when the malefic energy tries to come out into this world, it will fail.
Right. Yeah,
And I
it will
think that,
fail.
but what's scary though is that's the test of Pisces. I mean, when we do readings for people and they're in a 12th house transit, it's right before it's crossing the rising, or if it's really intense that way, you always tell the client, like, it's going to look like it's going to be the end, but then you're going to have this great new revival and you're going to get out of this, right? It's like, there's that part of this, which I think is what you said earlier, like the flatlining moment for people is the moment of realizing that you're not going to go where you think you're going to go. It's going to come back with when some of those symbols you brought up is this kind of great awareness coming that happens afterwards. And I think that, that this time though, you have to, I think, enjoy your life as much as you can and love the ones that they are around you, and stop putting off, your life. And especially if it's saying that, whether it's mandates or your mission, we all feel like we have a mission that we're coded with in our astrology and in our lives. And I think that it's an important time for us to all like go for it and not use that, because Pisces also creates great excuses, right? Like, I could put that off tomorrow, or let me shove that under the rug. Like, I don't want to take the trash out today. I'm just going to put it under the carpet. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
It's like we start doing that to places in our lives because we feel tired, or we feel like, I don't know if I want to go through change. And Pisces is the most mutable sign. It's mutable water. It is an emotional roller coaster, and it's an extreme change. And all the Aquarius that we're in right now is extremely creating, where after the nodal axis we went through of that Gemini Sag and those eclipses and all that Gemini, it's like our brains are tired trying to contemplate and figure these things out, and being too away from our hearts and our real emotional places.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's where you're going to find everything that you need at this moment. But there are parts to where you have to stay aware of this stuff. So, when people say, I'm just going to tune it out, right? It's kind of like, yes, you want to tune out this dark stuff, but you also want to have
you don't want to be blindsided. I can tell you that right now.
Yes,
I mean,
correct.
you got to have situational awareness in the world that we're living in. I mean, that's just bottom line. You go into an urban environment or even a suburban environment. If it's like, kind of edgy, you got to have situational awareness.
Yes.
Because if you don't have situational awareness, somebody's going to remind you that you need situational awareness. And that's a micro. You need it on the macro. And again, this gets back to this whole idea of the waves, and that we don't want to always be up on this wave of situational awareness. It's important. If we come down on the wave, it's like, okay, we're down on the wave now. Let's take some time out here. Let's do something that reminds me that I'm a human, and that I'm sharing this space, hopefully, with other humans. And I think one of the hardest things for a lot of people is we've seen man's inhumanity to man. I mean, it has been like legalized to be mean or to be snarky. And look, I can be a little snarky. I have a little snark. I'm a Scorpio rising. Okay.
That's why I love you though.
Right. So, and hopefully I take it out where it's needed. But we have been now conditioned to be mean and cruel to one another. And
can you believe what we see now on social media? People getting in arguments for they spend their whole day on an argument on a comment thread.
Oh my God. I mean, so
it's like there's not even having it in person. That's the craziest part. It's like,
right. And you can be having it with a freaking machine. You don't even know.
I know.
Right.
I know.
So this is, I think, the big test for us, because we can't lose touch with our humanity. If we lose touch with our humanity, we become the exact same things that are creating, for all intents and purposes, this hell on earth, right? We have succumbed to their virus if we lose our humanity.
Yeah.
But if we are too wide open, we're like the little girl with the lamb,
exactly.
And apparently, 2 Sabian symbols over, Sacrifice City, right? So,
yes.
So we're in this really interesting place.
Which they're already telling you, right? Like, you need to sacrifice, that you're going to have to pay higher prices for things because we're sanctioning Russia.
Right.
right? So that's just a small form of it. Small.
Yeah.
Because what that Sabian symbol goes into, and if it is Jupiter, Neptune, and Pisces, the two rulers of Pisces that are big gas planets, they're not little.
They are gas planets, right? Absolutely.
And that's the thing about Neptune, right? It looks like it's water. If you were on a spaceship, you'd be like, that looks like a great place to go. And the closer you get, you'd be like, I get the back away. It's not water. It's not. Right. Don't bring your trunks. Don't wear your bikini, girl. Like, get out of here. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and like even there was that movie,
Interstellar.
Astra,
was it? Or was Interstellar?
Interstellar is very this moment too, right? Where they
go to that water planet. All of a sudden, it's like, I got to get the fuck out of here.
Get out of here. But it also that weird one that just came out with Ad Astra with Brad Pitt, where Tommy Lee Jones, his dad, is going to go find life outside the universe and our solar system, and only makes it to Neptune, and is really still out there. And he killed all his crew because he went insane because it's too far away from Earth. That's Neptune. That the insanity can come. And then Brad Pitt has to go all the way out there and face his own insanity and deal with his father. It's really crazy because they're outside of Neptune, and you can just, or there was that old movie, what's it called? Where it all goes wrong. There's that sphere in the thing, and Event Horizon.
Oh, Event Horizon. Right? Yeah.
Like that's like, you could be going there if you don't know how to stay grounded in, having friends and conversations when you go through something right now, or you're scared of something, which that's a natural part of humanity, because Pisces is extremely sensitive. And then when you add Aquarius, it's sensitive and the nerves are being tested, and you're sensitive.
Right. Yeah.
That you need to have, like, I'll hit you up, like, and you'll hit me up, and we'll be like, how you doing? Everything okay? Everything, you got to have that. That's the Aquarian element. That's beautiful, is we can get out of a lot of these sensitivities and these nerves by having open talks, and by talking to people and having community and having places where we can, come together and talk about things. Cause then it's becomes trivial at that point. It becomes like you can find your center again. It's hard to find your center with Jupiter, Neptune, and Pisces. You can get downloads like crazy, but it can also make you crazy if you're just sitting there stewing on them all the time and not doing anything about them, or allowing them to become too much of the reality that isn't real yet. Like there's too many hypotheticals at this point. There's too many things that anything could be at this point. There's too many things that look like water, but it's not water, or it looks like the mirage, but it's not, like it's, and that's where I think right now, this moment coming up here of the great conjunction of Jupiter, Neptune, and then it's not like the last time Jupiter was in Pisces was easy. It was with Uranus, and then it went into Aries with Uranus, and it was opposed Saturn in 2010. And so we're living this reemergence of the weirdness that the 2010s was actually very weird. It turned out totally different than we all expected or thought. And Jupiter at the end of Pisces coming into Aries here, and then coming back to retrograde at 29 Pisces is going to be hard again. There's going to be great things Aries is going to bring us, and then it's going to be the pullback again. And I think that people are going to have to remember that the good things happen, and knowing how to flow through this, as you've been saying, is so important. And I think on a positive spiritual level, some of that sacrifice stuff is, sometimes you have to sacrifice maybe the instant gratification element of things. And North Node Taurus, watching things that are building great and watch them build, instead of the South Node Scorpionic energy where it's all or nothing now, and it's like, or waiting to be saved, or having the big investment come, or having somebody just instantly change everything in 1 millisecond.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we're lucky with Uranus and North Node and Taurus, which is going to be crazy this year, that they're conjuncting as well with Mars at the same time. That Taurus, I know people are so afraid about the financial systems and the credit systems and the digital dollar and the control. These, I was in the military. We had an old expression: hurry up and wait. The government moves very slow, and a lot of these things I think are definitely things to worry about and to pay attention to, and knowing how to position yourself. But I also think at the same time you have to remember implementing systems like that are, I mean, when they tried to do Obamacare, remember the website was down and it took forever, and they put all these, Affordable Care Act centers and nobody went. Like, it's really funny how people sometimes forget the greatest fears we have can be over, especially now with Jupiter and Neptune, can be way over amplified in a highly sensitive form. And when you can get lost in it, and you can get lost in the cavern of what you thought was wonders and really just be in the worst cavern of your own, like Jung's darkest shadow stuff, which actually would be Pisces.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are really great points. Really, really great points. This whole Neptune thing is totally fascinating. It's Neptune's in the third decan, so it's in that Scorpio decan.
I know.
And so we're dealing with death, right? We're dealing with people that are dying by injection.
And with the South Node Scorpio at the same time, getting trining.
Yeah, exactly. They've got the whole death thing is going on there too. And the other thing that I've noticed, and this is not Neptunian, but it does have to do with Saturn. And I've run into this with clients, and you could even see this just across the board. Saturn Aquarius has done a real number on friendships.
Yeah, it does.
It has done a real number on friendships. People have lost friends ever since Saturn has gone into Aquarius, whether it's somebody who has died, right? Because
literally,
that's happened,
right?
Yeah. And, or you're not coming over here because you don't do the things that I need you to do in order to step through that door. Or
it's political too.
Or you voted for that person.
Yeah.
And I can't have you around my children. Right. So, so this whole Saturn Aquarius transit has been really rough on friendships.
With this square to Uranus, which is the ruler of Aquarius and the ruler of friendship. And so it's like more so than ever, and making people feel isolated, and then only finding their friendships online, which is the flip of the Jupiter, Saturn, and Taurus square Uranus and Aquarius, which was the .com boom and built all these systems, ironically, for us to connect with. It's so weird when that's an inversion that you didn't think would happen. It was all about connecting the world, but it was really about connecting the world on which sides you're on in a weird way. And that was Jupiter, Neptune, and Pisces, right? It was free soilers or people that wanted slavery, slave states. And then it was also the change of a president. It was President Pierce. He was only a one-term president, went to the Democratic Convention in 1856, and they ousted him because of Bleeding Kansas. And the Democrats were like, oh, we're putting Buchanan in, because he was in Europe during that time, and brought Buchanan in, which is kind of like how Biden got brought in. Like, oh, you're an ex-vice president. You're part of Obama that the Democrats left. Like, and you haven't been really kind of part of this whole thing going on right now with Trump. And so let's bring you in because you'll save the day. And Buchanan did not save the day. If anything, his Secretary of War was, what's his name? Who started the Confederacy, the president. This whole war cabinet was what started the Confederacy. So, and then they split into the Northern and the Southern Democrats by the 1860 election. And that's what's kind of crazy, is we're seeing that right now with AOC and the progressive wing creating kind of this extreme progressive wing. And then you have Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, who are like the only two, but there's others behind them, but they just don't get the media attention, and they're too afraid, but that are the Democrats, right? Or like watching Bill Maher, who's a zero Aquarius with Jupiter, Saturn that met on his sun, watching him calling Democrats out for going too far. Right. So there's like systems in place that are kind of, I think, keeping things somewhat. There's no check, but it's like,
you bring up a really good point. And when you deal with Aquarius, like the best laid plans of mice and men don't always work out, right? Like you start off in a certain direction and you think, okay, it's going to go this way, and it's going to unfold in this fashion, and we're going to have these systems in place, and it doesn't always work out with Aquarius. And I got into like a 3 or 4 part series on my daily show where I was looking at these really dark connections in the state of California during the 70s. And one of the stops I made along the way was with a foundation called Synanon. Are you familiar with Synanon?
No.
Synanon.
Is that with an S or a C?
Synanon. Synanon.
Okay.
Right? So Synanon was the inspiration of this guy named Chuck Dieterich. Now, Dieterich was an Aries. He was, I think, like a 2 or 3 degree Aries, but he was an Aquarius rising, and he had Mars in Aquarius. So Dieterich is this guy who goes to LA. He's an alcoholic. He's from the Midwest. He goes to LA.
Was he a third house sun? Aquarius
He
rising?
was a third house sun, yes. So he goes to LA, and he's got a big drinking problem, huge drinking problem. So his wife leaves him, and he checks into AA, and he becomes one of these guys who will speak for hours at an AA meeting. Like, he just gets totally like consumed.
Oh, and an Aries that's a third houser? No.
Yeah.
No. Oh, wow. That's rare.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So Dieterich, this is in the late 50s. He takes part in this LSD experiment at UCLA. And he says it's the event that changes his life, right? Totally changes his life. He's like weeping for days with this thing. So he comes out of it, and he's like upset that AA cannot deal with heroin addicts. So he decides that he's going to start a foundation for heroin addicts. And eventually it started off, the name was Tender Loving Care. And he's this guy that comes up with the saying, today is the first day of the rest of your life. That's his saying.
Got you.
So he starts this Synanon Foundation, and he starts taking in people who are addicted to heroin. And so in his mind, Chuck Dieterich thought of himself as a great social reformer. This guy never went to college. He read Thoreau. I think he read Emerson. He was really into being accountable to self, right? So he starts this Synanon thing, and it really starts to take off. He's starting to have major impacts on people who are trying to kick dope. His methods are very unusual. There's this whole thing where they get together, and they originally called it a Synanon. And eventually, essentially what they do is they put a person in this hot seat, and they just start insulting this person. And then the person can insult everybody else in the room. Like nobody was immune to being insulted. It's called attack therapy. So they did this whole attack therapy thing, which was very unusual, but they were having these results. And a lot of jazz musicians from LA would come by and get clean. So they had a jazz band there. So it was a cool place to hang out. Gene Roddenberry would hang out there. Leonard Nimoy would hang out there. Right. But then everything just like tilts off the axis. And Chuck Dieterich winds up starting a cult. And he gets all these kids, and they've got shaved heads. And it's a freaky story. They move out of LA to Northern California. Actually, they move into Central California, and all this weird violence starts to happen. But in the interim, there are these two guys that go to Synanon, and they're psychologists, and they take a bunch of notes, and they say, there's something here, right? And they take the best parts of Synanon, and they create what we now know as these recovery centers, right? The whole recovery industry.
I see. That makes sense. Okay.
Right. Starts with Chuck Dieterich. And in a weird
communities and those kind of things.
But in a weird way, right? So he set out to do this thing. Like, I'm going to be a social reformer. And he was, right? His model was the model that got grafted and cleaned up, even though he winds up becoming this complete nutcase, right? Total nutcase. And it's his Aquarius rising and Mars in Aquarius, which keyed me into this idea that you could have a plan, and the plan could start off in a certain way, but because you're dealing with Aquarius, it may not really work out the way you think it's going to work out.
Was it the early 90s when he kind of went nuts and went?
No, he was starting to go off the rails in the 70s.
Oh, okay.
So the 70s, by the time he hits the 80s, like, he's in a really pretty bad place. So, and I thought about this, and I looked at him, because he's really this archetype. Like, he's an archetypal entity in a lot of ways, like with the attack therapy, Sun, I think Mercury and Aries, third
Right.
house, confrontational, and even the strident nature of like, hey, fuck you, AA. I'm going to start something that you can't do. And at that time, people just thought that you can't cure junkies, like they're a lost cause. And so he stood up for them. And you move that idea into our present time, right? And let's say Klaus Schwab, who happens to be an Aries, by the way. Klaus Schwab is the new Chuck Dietrich.
Mm-hmm.
And he thinks that we're going to have this new world order, right? This fourth industrial revolution.
Well,
But
and he's got his graduates, right? Like Tulsi Gabbard's one of them.
Another Aries, by the way.
I know. And how you've been seeing them, and even Fox News has been playing her up. And
but the idea here is that is it gonna happen the way Klaus Schwab and his
exactly
League of Evil?
Be honest, how much longer is that guy gonna make it?
I just think with the Aquarian energy and what I saw with this guy, with Chuck Dietrich, right? With Chuck Dietrich and this Aquarian energy, he did create that thing, but he wasn't the guy associated with it. And it
passes off to some, it's like an Olympic torch kind of thing. Like,
right.
You take it. It's kind of like, who I know Pete Buttigieg is, I think, part of one of the of that whole thing too. I know that what's the guy with the eye patch too? He's in there.
Oh, Dan Crenshaw.
Dan Crenshaw.
Dan Crenshaw. Yeah, he's
another
candidate for the Antichrist,
right? But it's like that. It's like, what if already that baton's been moved with Tulsi Gabbard? Like, like how she's been using the press now, and she's been like all about Fox. She went and spoke at CPAC.
Right.
Like, and like a lot of people don't kind of go down this other little rabbit hole more. So they see it, and she does a great job of how she communicates, how she looks, even, right? She gets women's attention. They like her. She gets men's attention. She gets liberals to like her. She gets, Republicans like her.
Dude, she seems mind controlled to me. There's something about her where I look at her and I feel like you're in a trance. She's very calm, which is cool and everything, right? But there's something about her. I just feel like, and I don't think she's completely in a trance all the time. There's something disassociative, a little bit about Tulsi Gabbard. And when you look at her chart, she's got one of these seesaw charts. She's got a bunch of Libra over here and a bunch of Aries over here. So what does that represent? Like a split personality. Whitney Houston had a really radical seesaw chart. What happened to her? And I'm not saying that's going to be Tulsi Gabbard's.
No, but she's dipping in the toes of the Republican Party, while at the same time, then now, and I mean, I agree with her, like going after Mitt Romney and how Mitt Romney was trying to, call anybody treasonous for questioning the lab theories in Ukraine, and then she called him out, right? Well, in 2024, with the North Node and Aries and all this stuff coming up here, and if Trump runs, who's not to say that she's gonna go attack Trump, right? But while at the same time, it's like gathering up people. Like there's something going on, dude.
Okay, so here's
what I'm talking about. Like
I've talked about this. So I think that Tulsi Gabbard is definitely somebody that they have invested a lot of time,
100%,
money, and energy in, right?
100%.
So Tulsi Gabbard is this third party candidate.
Right? And she's ex-military.
The Republicans and the Democrats are so polarized, right? So polarized. We need somebody who straddles both worlds, right?
Right. It's between her and Pete Buttigieg. They don't know which one, almost like. Well, because they're both right. They're both in the public view, but Pete Buttigieg is 29-degree Capricorn, and so Pluto is going to be on his sun, the beginning of next year.
Yeah, that's
and what's even weirder, or it's even like really there now with being a degree away.
Do you know what that degree of Capricorn is in the Sabian symbols?
I forgot which one. I know in human design, it's in the 60th gate of restriction, which is kind of
in human design, in the
In I
Sabian
Ching.
symbols.
Pinkies.
So this is a really interesting symbol.
Yeah, put it up, because to me, he's if I'm telling you, I will make the prediction right here. I'll put it as a month. I don't think Joe Biden's making it past a month from today, and this is March 25th.
I would not be surprised. I think
right?
that
there's no way.
The way that these transits are happening, and the way that I think, maybe again, maybe Biden falls into that realm of sacrifice, right?
Maybe,
maybe
but also Zolensky, and then imagine how chaotic that Jupiter and Neptune rules chaos, like how chaotic that would be. And then you're gonna have Kamala up there, and then no vice president, and then they're gonna throw Pete up there because Pete helped train her. Remember in the debates, Pete
he didn't do a very good job.
No. But and that's the whole part. And then he's the transportation secretary with the biggest infrastructure bipartisan bill. And he's wanting to spend a bunch of the money on putting cameras on the freeways because of racial day. Because of the police, like he doesn't want the police writing tickets. He wants cameras writing tickets on all of our interstates. Like that's where this guy's who couldn't even fix potholes as a mayor.
Yes.
Or you and I were talking about is horrible ways of garbage trucks, and they couldn't even fit down the alleys in his city.
He was the mayor of South Bendover.
I know. South Bendover. Well, but that's the thing, though. Tulsi Gabbard.
You might lose some people from that. I don't know.
No, everybody knows where Tulsi Gabbard has the whole military, just like him. Mm-hmm. But then with her, it's kind of like, okay, she's a woman, and she does have the ethnic element, and then she's more not progressive, right? But then you've got Pete, who's like tries to act like that too, but he would be the first gay, executive branch, whether it's vice president or president. And it's almost like they're definitely not throwing her up with Kamala because she's against things, right? And unless that's the craziness, you don't know. But there's definitely like, and then Cory Booker, right? Like in his whole thing just in this last week of not asking a question to the Supreme Court nominee, but going to church about it.
Right.
Literally.
Right. And this is a guy who grew up in a really wealthy suburb of New Jersey.
I know.
And whose father was an executive at IBM. Like Cory Booker, he could probably count the times on half a hand that he stepped into an AME church. Okay.
I know. Yeah. Let's go into the Sabian symbol.
Okay.
I think people are interested though, because like this is where it's so weird, right? Like you can see them playing the chess pieces, but we don't know which move they're going to make with it. But the astrology is showing 100% for sure Pete Buttigieg is not going away. That guy's definitely going to be another possible sacrifice. It's almost like I feel like there's going to be a lot of sacrifices. I also look at looking at what we're seeing, I feel like there's going to be a lot more than people realize. Like it's almost going to, and even Trudeau, I feel is going to be sacrificed in what the EU said. And looking at his chart and he's in his progressed balsamic moon, and it's going to be right where Saturn stations at 25 degrees of Aquarius. So I'm like, this guy's done quick. Like they're going to sacrifice him quick too. And, anyway.
Well, he should thank his lucky stars because, man, he was getting absolutely tarred and feathered. And then all of a sudden, the Putin propaganda started ramping up and all. It's like, oh.
Yeah, but the EU, when he spoke, nobody showed up. And a bunch of countries called him out and said that he's being a dictator. And that
I saw the guy from, was it Serbia or Slovenia or whatever?
Yeah, those countries. Then I think it was a woman from Spain.
Yeah, they ripped him a new asshole. And so nobody showing up is pretty bad. I mean,
it was bad. There was nobody
shunning is like the worst.
It's the worst. That's especially in Europe. That's how they do it.
Yeah.
America, they don't do it that way. We stay in the stands and we boo.
Yeah, we throw things at people.
Yeah, exactly. We throw the hot dog on you.
So this degree of Capricorn, 30 Capricorn, which is where.
Oh, that's right. A secret meeting. Yeah.
Yeah. So this was the degree that Mars was at. on the night that
Of the
Donald
election with Trump
won the
correct.
election.
Yes, correct.
And when he woke up the next morning, Mars was in Aquarius.
Right. At 0 degree, which is where
Yep.
Jupiter, Saturn met.
Yep.
And Mars, Venus just met, and Mars, Saturn the last year.
This is a really, here's what I think. I think that Hillary thought that she was going to win. I think there was a deal in place. I think they probably had maybe a kind of a steal moment in play, right? Like they had, I believe they had in 2020, but the amount of votes that Trump got was probably more that they could cover for the steal. That's my sense. And so
yeah, because that South Node Neptune conjunction was happening square Saturn and Sag, and it was like anybody who wasn't paying attention, which is kind of like now, right? Like, oh, I'm just not going to pay attention. I'm just gonna, we're fine, everything's fine, and no, it's not. It was definitely, you could see that. And also Paul Ryan was, remember all the emails that came out last year about him working with Pence when during the whole entire, before the election, but during the, the primary, like there was the exchanges going off, like, okay, we're going to use him. And then if he does win, we're going to oust him. And Paul Ryan was part of all that because he was Speaker of the House.
Right.
Those emails came out.
Yep.
They're out there, people.
So Hillary loses. And I don't think Trump thought he was going to win, honestly, because I remember looking at him the next day, he was dumbfounded. So
on that night, I was doing it that night, and I remember watching his speech that night at it was like 2 a.m.
I saw him. Yeah, I saw him.
And you should have his Leo rising came out like I won, like, because people don't realize Leo rising is like when we win, we're dumbfounded, like we won. Fuck yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. There's a lot going on.
So whoever, there's this idea that, well, these candidates are selected and it's all predetermined. And I think sometimes that's true.
But with the Sun Uranus lunar eclipse, Regulus, Mars. With Trump, he's the Joker card that kind of out of nowhere gets slipped in the deck. He's the green 00 in the roulette wheel. Like, you just put all your bets on everything else. Now, no, what 00?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I totally agree. He's total discordian.
That has to happen in reality. Like, not everything's perfect. There are those what the hell, and that's a Sun Uranus person, especially a lunar eclipse one, especially a Gemini one, especially he was also in his loosening of the bond for his part of spirit in his Hellenistic astrology, which is always, you're going to be something big. So it was all there.
Yeah. And then you look at Hillary the next day, and man, she was pissed, right?
That was actually one of the funniest things to watch, was all the people in the audience, right? And on the media. Remember the media? Oh my God. Like, you could tell that was not on the ticker.
No, it wasn't on the ticker. You could tell she'd been crying all night. She apparently should hit the sauce.
Well, I think because now that we're finding out, she was probably tripping balls about, everybody's gonna find out about what we were doing.
Right. So this symbol was in play, and I think they were like, okay, Trump's gonna win. We can't tilt this. There's too many votes. Like, why did Hillary just blow off Wisconsin and Michigan and Minnesota? Like, she had no ground game. She had no ground game because she thought that the machine that elected Obama 2 times
would just show up. Yeah.
The machine that elected George Bush Jr. twice, that all she had to do was just show up and the machine would take care of the rest.
Well, she also attacked the masculine, right? And thought that
was the other side of it, right?
Yes. Like that the feminine was going to pull through, when actually it was the feminine that voted for Trump, not Matt. They didn't vote for her. So you would think that all the women would vote for the first woman candidate for president, and they didn't.
And I think they underestimated the turnout for Trump. And they didn't have the backup votes, and they couldn't shut down the system long, like we just look at what happened in the last election. Look how long they shut the system down for. They couldn't do it because they didn't have their artillery in place in order to put it in. Right. So it's like, okay, we've got him. Now we have to develop a new strategy, which is going to be attack, 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 attack.
Especially
right?
because they didn't, usually both sides are working together, right? Because like they had Jeb Bush running. So,
yeah.
right. So with Trump beating the Bushes out, and then Trump beating Marco Rubio out, and then Trump beating Ted Cruz out, it was like, we don't know his side at all. But she did know him personally, but Trump's the kind of guy he used to call the newspapers and pretend it was him, be like, yeah, I know he got divorced, but he's getting calls for dates from Madonna right now. Like, do you remember those tapes? Those are hilarious. Like, like, yeah. So like they don't know what he's gonna do. He's a wild card. I loved it. I you could tell though, because it was real. You could feel. I remember the feeling that night of Mars at this degree. Yep. And coming, I had never felt so much angst in the air. I had to go sit in my car. I was doing a live event and I had to go sit in my car, and I was like, okay, because I was watching while I was doing it. I was in Portland, Oregon, of all places, the place that went crazy, that rebelled and threw shit on people and everything. And my audience that was watching, like 90% of them were waiting for Hillary to win. And I'm sitting there on my phone while doing it, and I'm like, just counting up the electoral count in my head. And I'm like, he's done it an hour before they did it. And when I told that to them, the whole audience, live on my YouTube, it's like, oh my God, But I remember I had to go to my car because this degree is so intense, especially Mars. Well, what's the higher form of Mars? Pluto.
Right. Yeah. So look at the last, the last little paragraph here. This is the last symbol belonging to scene 20, related to the zodiacal sign Capricorn. We see in it the culmination of social responsibility and a reference to executive power. So there was an executive decision that was made, I think, on the night of the election. We're going to call off the dogs. Hillary can't do it. We can't make the numbers work. Trump is going to win, and we're going to have a different strategy. So when Hillary showed up the next day, and I knew exactly what was going to happen. When she showed up the next day and she was there with Bill, they were both wearing purple. And I'm like, this is the purple revolution. This is what's coming. And that's exactly what happened. Exactly what happened. And Prince, who died on the Queen's birthday.
Right.
It was, if I'm not mistaken, 202 days between Prince's death day and the day that Trump was announced winner of the election. It's 202 days, which comes down into 22, right? Which is a master number. And then you move forward, and this whole
That's also Trump's sun degree is 22 degrees.
It is 22. That's right. It is 22. Mm-hmm. And then you have this whole revolutionary energy. I think Prince is another one of these sacrifices, right? He's a sacrifice for what's to come in Minneapolis with George Floyd. And Prince is a Gemini, and you have the Twin Cities, right? And you have George Floyd, or Steven Jackson, the NBA player, who called George Floyd his twin, right? Which is weird.
That's very weird.
It is really. And Steven Jackson's a Mason, by the way. And George Floyd, if I'm not mistaken, I think he had the same tattoo that LeBron has, like the boule. He's got the boule tattoo on him, if I'm not mistaken.
Dude, there was video of George Floyd on Pornhub.
Yeah.
Doing all the stuff right before that whole thing happened. People didn't do their research on it, or even that the cameras that were installed at that liquor store, that side store, were all brand new and just all perfectly put in the right spot. Like they were brand new.
Yeah. So we were in Gemini at that point in time. Trudeau to Gemini.
The cop worked with him at a club 20 years prior.
Right. They're at the same club. The cop was
the cop was the security, and so was George Floyd.
Floyd was the bouncer.
I know.
And we're in Gemini, right? So there's all these mirrors, It's like a maze of mirrors when
Yeah,
she goes
fun,
through
like a scary funhouse mirror thing, right?
yeah,
Where, oh
exactly.
my God,
Everything's
like,
distorted and
and loud, weird music and carnies.
yeah, and you didn't really a lot of sleight of hand, even the car, like the cop car,
Right.
the license plates don't match up. I mean, there's the video doesn't match up. And by the way, what happened to those other cops?
What happened
Derek
to those other
Chauvin,
cops? Or, of course, then it came out, right? Like the guy ate a bunch of fentanyl, and
right?
hello, it's in
Yeah,
the video too, him throwing it in his mouth.
right.
And then it was during the time of the CV, right? So like there's that whole like him not breathing, and they're kind of putting that out subconsciously into the air, but that's
right.
from the
Yep.
fentanyl.
Right. Yep. And then, what happens? There's a color revolution. It's purple. Purple is everywhere. Like the world is bathed in purple after George Floyd dies. That's Prince, the purple one. And what's the name of his band? The Revolution.
Right.
So when I saw Hillary and Bill show up in purple, I'm like, okay, Houston, we have a problem. Because I know where this is going. It's exactly where it went, right? It's exactly where it went. We went through, for all intents and purposes, a coup. We went through a freaking coup. And we're dealing with the backside of a coup.
But do you think this might be kind of controversial, but because I'm glad that you told people about Mars at this degree on the night of the election with Trump, the first election, 2016.
Right. Yep.
With Pluto coming here in less than a year, right? And with what we're seeing right now, Trump just filed a lawsuit against not just the Hillary Clinton campaign, but James Comey, the FBI agents that were involved in the investigation.
You got a RICO, 460 page or 420 page RICO.
Yes. I mean, it's and people are like, kind of like, well, why? And I'm like, okay, there's the Durham report, but this gets courts to pull things out into the public more. That's what people aren't realizing is Trump's not doing it for the money. He's doing it to get the stuff out. Because if Pluto gets to this degree and it is a truth exposer, there's something about, especially because it's a degree away also from Aquarius and the election, and the weird shit that was going on was Jupiter, Saturn, and Aquarius when it met December 21st, 2020. Right. We have Biden who called up some printer and said, put up executive office of the president or whatever, the president-elect. Yeah, president-elect. Like nobody, like the U.S. government doesn't make that for you. Right. Like, yeah. And Trump never seceded from the election ever. Still hasn't. Right. So, okay, I've talked about this. If you fast forward and you get out to October 31st, Halloween, Mars is in Gemini at the degree of Trump's sun in Uranus. And then I've been talking about this. We're going to see the return of Trump. Yes, big time. It's going to happen. And how it happens, especially with the Mars retrograde that's going to be happening. It's going to retrograde. It's going to retrograde over America's Mars. Yep. In 2023, it goes direct again. It hits the sun again. Exactly. While Pluto comes to this 29 and then to 0 Aquarius. That's right. So, which is a Trump moment, a Mars crossover, and now here's a Pluto crossover. So what's interesting about when he was in office, especially during that last year, and your cat rolls up right as we're talking about that. This is the real Leo King right here, brother. That is. No, hey, I he's a ham. He's a total. Anyway, but I'm a big believer that cats show up always for a reason at a moment spiritually all the time. That's why the pharaohs had them. They always had the cats by them. Yeah. So, did you see? You probably didn't see last week's show, but I had a scorpion in here. No way. And yeah. So he was going to go after the scorpion. I'm like, oh, I can't have that. So to get up from my show, I had to stomp the shit out of this scorpion, and because I wasn't going to like
I probably could have been more humane about it, but I wasn't. And have you ever stepped on a scorpion? Like try to like,
I mean, I've ran into them, the small, like whiter ones in Arizona.
right.
Right.
Well,
They're really
they've got this
not the
hard,
big ones.
they've got this hard shell. Right. So
Right.
I had to step on this thing at least 3 times, man. I stomped the shit out of it.
I mean, that's a Scorpio, right? Fixed water, like that. It's ice, right? Like it's fixed emotion. It's got that shell. Like it's very hard to penetrate.
It is totally. And then he went over there and he started like batting around like he killed it. Right? That's a total Leo. Right? I did that.
Yeah. Like, look at that, Dad. Look at me. Woo.
Yeah.
Aren't I special?
So I think we're going to see the return of Trump, and it's going to be maximum chaos.
That's what I think is part of this weird plan.
Right.
And I almost feel like it's been part of the plan that even Trump knows. I got a feeling that all this stuff that we're seeing is all part of it. I wanted just for people to kind of understand. I was going to share just the chart of the election night 2016 and then show that degree that you're showing and what happened that night, because this is going to happen with Pluto, which is the exposer of what was the secret meeting stuff about. Right. Whether that's actually what happens or not is kind of going to be the interesting element to all this, because on that election night, and we'll do it, I'll change it real quick to just Washington DC time here, but that's what is going to be the most interesting thing. I've been looking in the background of it, was like, man, Pluto crossing over 29 through 0 degrees Aquarius is also when the Revolutionary War really kicked off hardcore. A lot of people think that the Declaration of Independence just was like the beginnings of a war or something. Like, yeah,
sure.
But
not
close yet. It was
yeah.
Valley
real action
Forge
happens later. Yeah.
Like exactly, like Valley Forge and just the beginnings of all that stuff really are 0 Aquarius. Like it starts really getting off during that time.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And we'll just do the White House. I'll put for 0 Aries too. But that night, because it was about like 2 a.m. ish when he went out and talked, and she seceded. It was around 2 a.m. if I remember.
I don't
do it for like 1:12. But like, that's interesting though. Is I'm doing day. I went too far there. Oops, there we go. On Tuesday the 8th. There we go. So there's Mars at 29, and that next day it went 0.
That's right.
And that was people waking up. Oh yeah. Look at that's what's interesting. Actually, that's the moment Trump spoke, Mars and Aquarius, because I had it kind of wrong. There it is, the hours. Here we go. There it is at 12 a.m. November 9th, Wednesday morning, because Tuesday's the election. There it is, Tuesday at 11:12 p.m. East Coast time. There's Mars at 29 Capricorn, and then goes midnight and 12:12, and you're right there. And then you go one more hour, and yeah, it's not even an hour. I mean, I can go by minutes here, and you're at Mars coming into Aquarius, and that's what we're about to see. I mean, we just passed the year date just like about a week or whatever ago of Pluto coming to 0 Aquarius. Like we're less than a year away. And if you see also the Jupiter Neptune conjunction happening, that's squaring Trump's sun and his lunar eclipse. It's also squaring the Mars of America, which is 21 Gemini. But there's so there's that Mars by 12:51 a.m., which was 9:51 a.m. West Coast. And that was the moment when America knew. You saw the media freaking out. Was that moment?
Right. And what we have is this revolutionary energy, and the revolutionary energy is coming from both sides. So you have the so-called right, or the so-called conservatives, the deplorables. This is their moment of victory, right? They've lapped the field, and now they're in the White House. So that's revolutionary energy. And you also have the revolutionary energy that's being initiated by the two Clintons showing up in purple. So again,
that was also Trump's Jupiter return too.
That's right. Yep.
And that was that South Node Neptune. So there's so much more behind the curtain than people realize with that South Node Neptune and Pisces. And there's Chiron at 20. So how funny, like even taking your Sabian symbols at Chiron, and then Chiron for those years had to go through those weird sacrifices too, and those weird things like that whole, we've been building up to this moment here, which is getting, right here about like, Neptune comes at what, 25 this year, right? So
yep.
It's all building up, because if I were to just erase this real quick and take us to where we're coming here in the, like, we could just take it to we'll just go to, let's go the years ahead, and we'll go to the end of 2022. Why is this thing? There we go. Man, the time flies.
Right?
Like, I want to go to that October. You were talking about Halloween 2022, right?
Yeah.
And that, because that's when we're going to see the planet station direct that we keep seeing every October, right? Pluto, Saturn, and then and usually like Jupiter falls right after that, which it will at the last degrees of Pisces. It's going to come to 28, but we're going to see a rocket ship launch from Halloween into 2023. I mean, again, every year it just keeps happening. How interesting too that South Node's going to be coming towards the election degree of Scorpio, November 8th. South Node's going to be around that zone at that moment.
Yeah, there's Mars down there at 25 degrees.
Right. And that's the retrograde that's coming here. But it's going to be in alignment with his rising too. But it's going to be in minor square here to Jupiter and Neptune. It's going to go through Neptune's nebulousness. And because Neptune retrogrades 222, it's going to be interesting to me to watch. And I want to show people so here's Pluto at 26. And really it's going to be interesting because Pluto, here's 28 where it's at now today, but on January 30th of 2023, Pluto will come past to 29 by February. And so now you get weird because you go one more month and now you're at 0. So less than a year from now, the events, and it's going to be Saturn now in Pisces too, not Aquarius. And for a Gemini like him, that's his 10th house for all Geminis, right? Like that's going to be
right.
major. And Neptune will be done with the squares to his sun and moon. So there's going to be this really interesting change. And he is a Leo rising. So North Node Taurus here with Uranus Taurus, Venus Taurus, while that's all coming in, is going to be really intense. And this is going to be the node squaring Pluto in Aquarius. That something about that zone there. And what's weird is Pete Buttigieg, that's where his sun is at 29 Capricorn. And then that's also where Bill Maher's sun is 0 Aquarius. And you've been seeing his voice. These are voices you're going to be seeing as the things that are going to be coming up really extreme. And then how funny, Jupiter is going to be in exact opposition of where it was when Trump won in 2016. So it'll be the exact opposite place.
Interesting.
Right?
Very, very interesting. Yes, it will.
Mm-hmm. And that was Saturn in Sag, and now it's Saturn in Pisces, another mutable sign. And then look at that Mars in Cancer, and that actually for Trump is where he's got his ruler of his 10th house, Venus. He's got his
he's got Venus,
Saturn.
Mercury, Saturn,
right?
Exactly. All in Cancer.
Yeah.
So those show up in his 11th house.
Yep.
And that's where he connects with people at a fundamental values level. Like that's how he can connect with like the silent majority or Joe Sixpack, right? It was through those planets in the 11th house.
Yeah. And this will be the first major planet, Mars, in the months prior that's going to go past the nodes, after North Node finally passes Uranus. Because if you were to take us to today, All the
Yeah.
planets are on one side of the nodes.
Right.
Right. So it's been so lopsided and so weird, and also very weirdly karmic, a feeling like, where are we going anywhere? Because if you just take the nodes like this, these are just bodies. There's nothing there. Look at from this moon tonight as we're talking all the way to the sun, or if you want to bring Chiron in and Uranus, or here to Uranus, they're all on one side of the nodes. It's lopsided. There's nothing. And if you really think about it, sure, the sun's going to pass the north node when it comes into Taurus. Mercury's going pretty fast too, so it'll come. But really, a major kind of planet that's actually doing something would be Mars. And Mars is going to be passing, coming up here. And when Mars is going to be with Uranus this summer and all that stuff, it's got to retrograde and come back. It's not going to go that far. There's so much weird stuff that's about to happen here. And a lot of stuff is just staying in this zone here. It's like backup traffic, or when you were bringing up the collective and so much stuff earlier about Neptune, right? It's in the past, but a lot of it also is like the spiritual backlog of so many weird situations that need karmic clearing, and that there is way too much stuff here. If we take the Trump scenario, that there's karmic issues that aren't done yet that need to be cleared up, especially just if you think of his Twitter being gone. Right. But like Putin's is not gone.
Does Putin have a Twitter account?
Somebody was showing, yeah, like that, or like the Iranian, like all these other people. Yeah, there's a bunch of Russian stuff that they still have their Twitters.
Well, I think the Saudis have Twitter accounts, right? I mean,
right.
The Saudis have managed to
that's what's crazy though, is that, especially Twitter's an American company, right? And
it's
a public American company.
It's a public company, and Paul Singer has a majority share in Twitter.
And Jack Dorsey, how weird of his character that came through, did all this and then left, and was going into money and crypto with his Square and going into that space.
Somebody told me one time that they knew somebody who said that Jack Dorsey was actually a good guy. Right.
And there's something, that's what I'm saying, is like whenever I see characters come in at really weird moments and then leave, I'm like, Now,
I don't have anything to back that up.
Me neither.
But
it is weird though that even though he did get rid of Trump's Twitter, which I almost feel like maybe
I don't think he had any choice in that.
Right, exactly. And how the White House has taken over with the Surgeon General now's office, has been doing this whole social media thing. And
Paul Singer is the guy who wound up getting a majority share in Twitter, and Paul Singer is a vulture capitalist. He's like Mitt Romney on steroids.
Right.
And he and Trump had been at odds. And then Paul Singer and Sheldon Adelson and Bernie Marcus, the guy who started Home Depot, they all gave money to Trump for his campaign. And Trump had campaign promises to fulfill to all three of them. And so Trump, once I think he fulfilled those campaign promises, especially with Paul Singer, I think Singer cut him off at the knees, because Paul Singer is not a good dude. He's a Leo, and he ruined Cabela's.
He's a bad dude.
He ruined Cabela's. He basically strong-armed Cabela's into selling by acquiring bass fishing outlets. And he did a hostile takeover of Cabela's. And Cabela's is it's a company town. I think it's in Kansas, if I'm not mistaken. And once he took over Cabela's, the whole company town just went to shit.
Right.
It's like he didn't care. Right. He wanted to crater that he didn't want, I don't know if he wanted to crater that town, but by doing what he did crater that town. So you went from a town that had a business, had a model franchise for things that were outdoors, right? There was a go-to outdoors place. and Paul Singer just took his thumb and just crushed it like they were ants.
Mm.
So this is the guy that's in charge of Twitter now. I could go on and on about
I know.
it.
I've been that guy is definitely the bad guy of Twitter. Like, you know what I mean?
Well, he's just bad. He's bad in general. He's got a backdoor sort of public-private initiative with Israel and developing like programmers out of their Project 8200 and then getting them inserted into American companies. Like there's a lot of weird stuff with Paul Singer, and he's got a shit ton of money, and he's basically in charge of Twitter now.
Right.
So I think whatever happened with Trump, it came through Paul Singer. I don't think Jack Dorsey had a hell of a lot to do with it.
Right.
But when they did that, it was symbolic in that Trump was the Vox Populi. And if you look at his chart, his midheaven is conjunct Algol.
Right.
So they cut him off. They cut the head off. And so he could not theoretically speak for the people, or, he was,
Well, he was treated like Medusa, right?
Exactly.
That he was sacrificed in a way where another sacrifice, right? But
Yeah.
like that tainting the sacred, holy grounds kind of energy, right? Like Medusa, but really Zeus raped her.
And
Like,
you remember the image of Kathy Griffin,
right,
with the bloody Trump head,
right?
That is Algol. Like that was a symbol of Algol, and that was like a form of predictive magic, right? We're not going to cut his head off, but we'll cut his voice off.
What's really weird is just today, we're looking at today, his progressed new moon has finally moved out of where the moon is now 31 degrees away from his sun. And so his progressed new moons happen. And here's his moon at 6 progressed Libra. And ironically, so we add 4 and then we add another 4. So in 8 months, his progressed moon is going to conjunct his Chiron. There's definitely something going on, but then you move another 3 degrees there in 11 months, which is about a year that we were showing this happens. And his progressed moon will be exactly on his natal Jupiter.
Interesting. Which is square Neptune. He's got that Jupiter Neptune. He's got a Jupiter Neptune conjunction.
Right. We're in a Jupiter Neptune year.
Right. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And how weird too that Neptune now is at 23. So no longer is it square his moon. So because he's been missing in action, right? Or I actually think he was going through psychological like issues because Neptune square the sun, and I was born with these nodes. He had it square his nodes. I went through panic disorder, panic attacks, anxiety. Like I think he was a basket case for the last year because of dealing with a lot of weird stuff that happened. But now that Jupiter and Neptune have moved, or Neptune's moved to 23, it's going to come back to 22 though and square his sun, but it's done with his moon. It's done with his nodes. But at that time, that's coming in a year, it'll be definitely done. And you're starting to see the breakout of the moon. I love when the moon, after a new moon, when it finally comes into its waxing phase and you just see that crescent moon that finally pops up, right?
Yeah.
That's what is happening in Trump's chart right now.
So is he lined up for a Jupiter Neptune in conjunct? Is that going to happen? Like, do the numbers work on that?
I mean, they do with his Saturn. Oh, they're trining his Saturn. Sorry. So no,
Pisces, right? Pisces, the Libra.
Right. And it's kind of, no, it's too off. It's too off.
Okay. Because that would be interesting.
That would be interesting. But I feel like that's what's weird, though, is it is going to support his Venus and his Saturn in trine, but then square his sun. So his identity is still going to have a weird kind of moment here. But really, though, about what's happening with legal stuff, what's happening with his True Social that just came out, and his career is getting a bump, and Pluto's done opposing his his Venus here, which does rule his midheaven. So that's what I'm saying is as looking at this, like his rough patch here is pretty much over.
He had that Saturn opposition at 74 too.
Right.
And I was looking at that. I'm like, this is not the opposition you want to have when you're running for president, unless you're going to be a different kind of president.
Correct. Like if I run it for April 12th on that day, that we're going to see Jupiter and Neptune come together. I think it's actually the 11th for, let's move it hours back. We're Jupiter and Neptune here. So there it is at 23. Oh, there's 24, 23. Okay. Yeah. So when they're approaching here, they're all happening in his 7th house too. So that could be, that's also legal. And he is doing a big legal thing right now.
Right.
But also, what relationships is he really building? But I feel like there's definitely some really interesting aspects happening to him, because when I do readings for people and I see them go through a Neptune transit, and him coming, just having enough breath to have, it's like a breath of fresh air to come. It's after. It's in astrology, we do approaching, or that it's leaving, right?
Separating.
This is separating. Yeah. So that's what's interesting to me. And look at the moon is going to be in Leo for this Jupiter Neptune conjunction. Right.
And it's right on his ascendant.
Yeah, I know. And his Mars. And then Saturn's going to oppose his Mars this year. But I don't find that as a bad thing. That's kind of like taking the power back in many ways, right? Like against, of course, his Mars is in the 12th house of hidden enemies, and Saturn's exposing enemies. So in the 6th, so there's this enemy thing kind of happening, but that big Jupiter Neptune is going to try in that Saturn exact in Cancer. Exact. And,
interesting.
Then you also get that Jupiter Neptune trine his Venus, which is his midheaven. And the North Node's finally coming off of that midheaven. You know what I mean? Which actually is a relief. Some people think like, and it's weird because right now as we're talking, it just is leaving that midheaven. So,
and if it's in the 9th house, then
it's
again,
way better.
Well, it's legal stuff too in the 9th house.
Yeah, it is. And he was born with people always wonder, why does he always win in every court case? He's got that Jupiter, Neptune, Chiron, Libra, 2nd house thing. I always tell people, I'm like, he chose this life to get through the legal shit somehow. It's crazy. He can get through. That's where his whole life. I mean, this guy's filed bankruptcy for over $1 billion with the Taj Mahal. And that's where he was at with Saturn and Aquarius going into Pisces. Was how in the hell did he get through that? That
was Sheldon Adelson. Sheldon Adelson helped him out.
Right. And, but how he went to the conference when he said, oh, this is a great deal. Like, he made it like as if it was like, he's the master at,
well, that's his Mercury,
right?
Jupiter square, Mercury, Neptune square. Right. I mean, everything is bigger than it really is. Yeah. So he gets into that kind of weird territory where he's hyping things, and sometimes he's not being entirely truthful, right? You get that with a Mercury Neptune square. It's just,
and he's got Hermes conjunct Mercury too, and they both are square that Neptune really hardcore.
Right. So sometimes he's running, how to win friends and influence people, the Norman Vincent Peale program, or sometimes he's running the Roy Cohn program. You never know.
And the Roy, yeah, I know. And when he met him, when his dad, when he did the first hotel in Manhattan,
yeah,
it was because of Roy Combs and the people he set him up with, because he was a lawyer that knew everybody, and he was hardcore.
Right. And to me, you look at those two individuals, Norman Vincent Peale, who was, I think he was an Anglican bishop, but he was also really into the whole power positive thinking thing, right? He's also a Mason, by the way.
Yeah.
So Norman Vincent Peale is the guy who marries him and Ivania, right? So he gets married by Norman Vincent Peale. So he's got Norman Vincent Peale, and then he's got Roy Cohn, who would do anything. Roy Cohn was such a Machiavellian character. So these are Trump's like two spiritual teachers, his two mentors, and they couldn't be more dissimilar. And I think that's really, in a lot of ways, appropriate for that Sun-Uranus conjunction in Gemini, right? Because these two very different individuals are making this kind of profound impact on his life, heaven and hell, right? The great sinner and theoretically Norman Vincent Peale, the great redeemer, and somebody who believes in humanity. And when you hear Trump talk in these kind of expansive terms, you're hearing Norman Vincent Peale. I mean, he's channeling that guy. And when you hear him, get snappy on Twitter or do that other stuff, I think partially you're hearing Roy Cohen. Right?
Yeah.
So he's a fascinating character astrologically, and you can see how things play out in his life astrologically as well.
Right. I wanted to show people this because when I was doing his stuff for 2020 election, I was like, well, there's something really interesting here, which is when I looked at his what was it? It was in his perfections. No, it was in his. Oh yeah, it was. Maybe it was in. No, it was down here in his Arabic lots list, and I looked at his lot of victory, part of victory, right?
Yep.
It was 15 Aries. Mars was at 15 Aries on the election night of 2020.
That's deep, David. That's arcane, man.
And I remember doing it. I'm like, this guy's gonna so that part of victory is gonna happen whether people like it or not. Like, it's going to win. Look at that. Part of valor is at 1 Pisces, where Saturn's gonna be when Pluto crosses the line we're talking about, 29 Capricorn to 0 Aquarius.
Right.
And the other thing that I just was realizing was, here's his 22-degree vertex where Saturn, Pluto, the Sun, and Mercury met on January 12th of 2020, when impeachment was happening, and then the CV thing, and then the whole I like to show people that it's a turning point. The vertex is a point of the prime vernal, where the vernal intersects in the ecliptic of the west, and the opposite point is in the east. This represents the opening and closing of doors in our lives, where people arrive and leave, and events start and finish. So that was definitely a moment that hit in Capricorn for him there. But it's quite interesting to me to see now. We're seeing the North Node in Taurus. We're going to see that trine that spot, and we're going to start to see, the Capricorn energy ending. And now his lot of fortune is going to be playing out here in Aquarius, and his lot of spirit sits there. This is the actual lot that's actually used in Hellenistic astrology. That's at 1. And that's also a place for him that's extremely powerful. So I the more I keep looking, I'm like, he's coming out of the woods, this is not, this is not people, and then Biden's going into the woods.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that it was important for us to kind of go there, because I think, not enough people are willing to talk about this stuff publicly.
No, I don't think so. So Trump's progressed sun is in Virgo, right?
5 degrees. Yeah.
5 degrees Virgo. That's a really interesting progressed sun. And it changed when he got elected, didn't it?
Yes. He went from, his election was him progressing to Virgo on Regulus.
Right. On Regulus, which had just gone from
Leo
to Virgo
in 2012. Yeah, correct.
Yeah. Wow.
And which is why he was so popular, because Virgo is about service and the people being the kings and queens. Right. And to watch a guy who shits in gold toilets hanging out and wearing a fucking, a trucker hat and hanging out with the truckers and talking to the people, the Virgo, the people that are actually the people that run the country, and focusing always on that. That's why he Regulus in Virgo will, if you're not about the people, bye-bye.
Right. And so that's a really interesting shift, because for a long time we were in this Leo focus, kind of heliocentric, top down divine king world, right? That's what Regulus was about. And when it made that shift into Virgo, it's really significant. And I still think we haven't really integrated that, because Virgo's mutable, right? And the people are still trying to figure out how they can run shit. I mean, so I think we're in this very adaptive phase still. We still haven't figured out, like, even though Trump is interesting and he certainly is a polarizing and charismatic figure, right? The future of the earth is really not about Trump.
Correct.
And it's not about any of these people, right? It's really about this zero, Regulus, and Virgo that we have to sort out and we have to figure out.
Which that's the weird quincunx that Jupiter, Saturn, and Aquarius at zero was to that zero Regulus.
Right.
Virgo, right? Like that's the whole weird, both are about service. And then it's like, and then we're in Pisces right now where I'm like, it's like tuning the station and finding the right, are we on the right station? Or we're having a kind of,
right.
We're on all the dials on Apollo 13 trying to get home. Like, you know, I feel like we're in Apollo 13, you know.
It feels to me like since 2012 and Virgo went into Regulus, it's kind of like the inmates are running the asylum. Like they haven't figured out the systems yet.
Right.
And everybody has like a special need and a grievance, and everybody is critical. You know, we're dealing with critical race theory, which is a very kind of Virgoan sort of thing. So we haven't sorted it out yet. And we're still in this kind of very open phase where we're trying to figure out how to, I don't want to use the word become empowered, but how to have, just starting off, going right back to where we started, this idea that we are localized consciousness, but connected to everything else.
Everything. I mean, it's the collective, which is it's a group of individual souls with unique codes that are all part of the same one. It's like Van Gogh and how he painted, right? It was like he just did it by dots, and we're all those unique colors. But if you stand out and look, it's a whole picture that you can't just make it all one color.
Right.
You know? And
that's the second time that reference has come up today, by the way.
Oh, really?
That reference came up on my show earlier today. And we were talking about consciousness, and we were talking about that. It was use the exact same metaphor. And it was in the same context of what I brought to like just this part of our conversation. That's interesting.
Right. Because like a good example, I talked about it last night with Natalie. It's like just in the last week, right? It's like you see people putting Ukraine flags on their Twitter and on their Instagram, or they're posting that, or they're wearing shirts now. But ironically enough, you know, the martial law in Ukraine is if you're a man 18 to 60, you got to stay and fight, including if you're trans.
Right. Yeah.
And so a bunch of the trans community kind of, I don't know if I should probably take down my flag now. Right.
Right. They weren't letting them out of Ukraine. Like, yo, you're a dude, go back.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah,
they're not letting him even go into Poland. Right. They're like, no, you got to go back. Right. And it's just really weird to see this, like, you know, I'm all about, if you want to be whatever you want to be, you want to be whatever you want to be. But these are where these underlying kind of hard Aquarian, Virgo, like systematic in their own ways, but also Aquarius and Virgo have a good way of understanding the uniqueness of the individual in a beautiful way. But Virgo wants to make it better by making criticisms and adjustments and finding a fine tuning, whereas Aquarius wants to see how that individual fits in the system, but still has its own freedom because it needs its freedom.
Right. That's a really
and so, you know, it's like you can be trans, but like at the end of the day, you can't also escape your biology. There's that's the debate deeply, right? But then like the people who made the Matrix, right? Like that's they say they made the movie of like, you can transcend anything, right?
Right.
Where that too is actually another part that I think we're all looking at too. So, you know, there's no wrong or right way at this moment. It's more of, I think the more if we actually all came together and didn't have the divisiveness of media, which is Jupiter, Neptune, and and also Uranus that was in semi-square to Neptune throughout Trump's presidency when Uranus came into Taurus
Right.
in 2018. Like we all would realize that we all think a lot the same and we all want the best for all of us. Like I want the best for trans people and I want the best. We all want the best for everybody. Nobody here. I don't know. The idea that the world's racist or the world's it's like the only ones that I see are racist really are the big people that are talking in the power positions. The only ones that are really not caring about everybody are the ones in the power positions.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, this whole idea of institutional racism has spread like wildfire and it's infesting the educational system. And
it is, but you know what's
yeah.
weird though is you know, if we're gonna bring up like Black Lives Matter, most people that are of, you know, that are Black don't agree with what's going on.
I would agree with you. Although there is a certain demographic age-wise that I think may lean into it a bit more. Like I think you could find probably a pretty good chunk of the millennials who, you know, through their relation with Pluto, like extreme, I'm either in or out, right? So they could be all in on that. But I would say to your point, yeah, I mean, I just hung out with my kid down in spring break down in Port Aransas. I mean, I wasn't really there. I mean, I was there. I just had a place that I was renting, and
you didn't participate in spring break, Robert?
No. You know, it was the sun was in my fourth house, conjunct my south node. Okay,
gotcha.
So I was cool by the beach, right? Long walk in the beach. So, but what
you had a good like nice seat watching it happen.
Yeah, it was cool, man. You know what I saw was a lot of different people from kind of different backgrounds and hanging out. Right. There was no animus and it was like everybody was pretty cool, you know, clearly right. Spring break. And
I mean, look at Miami. They had to shut that down again and put up restrictions and put up, you know,
yeah, that's a whole different scene, man.
But it was kind of interesting that happened back to back in Saturn and Aquarius. Right.
Yeah.
Like people think they can escape, like they go have these kind of like fanatical freedom moments, but Saturn's still gonna. And I think that's kind of something that people have to remember is through these moments of freedom that are desperate and wanted, Saturn's still going to, you know, find some barrier that you're going to have to get overcome. It's not just fully free, you know, like until Saturn leaves. And Pluto will be in there. And that's where it really gets like kind of anything will be done to get through a barrier, you know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, we're living in interesting times, and I feel like, you know, just, you know, pulling this train into the station, I feel like, you know, one of the things that, you know, people need to stay in touch with is their humanity.
Yeah.
And I think what you really touched on something where you were talking about Van Gogh and, you know, his version of painting, and that was his code. And honestly, that's what Virgo is about. Like Virgo is about finding purpose and meaning.
Yes.
And even if it's in something that you think might be mundane, or it may not be the you know, the position or the thing that you thought you were going to do at some certain point in time, it doesn't mean that your game is over, right? It doesn't mean you're tapped out, and you can actually find something fulfilling and purposeful during this time.
Can I add to that? Cause I want to say that mundane part of Virgo, whether it's the mundane or it's really taking, cause Leo's before it, right? So it's like your passion, what brings you your heart and your happiness, but you just can't sit on that. You have to do something about it and you have to make it better.
Right.
Like Jeff Jower, before he passed, told me, you know, he looks at it as like, this is where you make your edits. This is where you do your thing of what your creation is or what your heart is. But Virgo will still take you back to Leo if it gets too mundane to where you're like, why am I doing this? I'm running.
Good point.
Right. Like Virgo will then take you back to Leo to go, let me find my happiness. And then now, you know what? I feel great because Virgo is when you're in the flow and you've got your systems down and you're at it. It's sports. Virgo's sports. It's when you're in the moment. It's when you are, you know, catching the ball at the right moment in time because you practice and you got to the right place and you were passionate about it and you got there. It's Virgo that gets you there. So it's like, we all are looking for that. I think the more that you say we get to our humanity, which opposite of that is Leo, there's a connection there. There's this powerful presence that people think is gone, but it's there for the taking if you're willing to go through the hurdles it kind of feels like that you have to go through, which are really more of just realizing how important it is and staying connected to it, you know.
So we could just like slice that quadrant out from the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th. And that quadrant, I think, is really vital for living. You need passion. You need a sense of being able to feel like your heart is into something. You need the repetition, the practice. You need to be able to demonstrate it, which is what Virgo does. And then you need to connect with another person. Right. Where you bring that 7th house in and it ties that quadrant together. And I feel like if people can connect those 3 quadrants and those 3 signs, it can be really instructive for getting through this time.
Yeah, because in astrology, body wise, it's the heart, it's the intestines, and then the kidneys.
Yeah.
So, you know, and that's stuff that is important to bring balance in your. Another person brings you into balance. And also Aquarius is, we can't do this alone. We can't change the world alone. One person's not going to do it. It's all of us.
Right.
And at the same time, it's this really beautiful element of that Virgo energy, which is like, we all got to be doing something too. Like Aquarius is the ideas of it all and how it comes together, and the epiphanies and the experimentation with it at some points. But it's Virgo that is, you're out in the fields and you're doing, you're picking the wheat and then you're bundling it up and you're understanding the harvest, right? So I know a lot of people are afraid that we're all being harvested if we go into like deep spiritual conspiracy stuff, right? Like we're all the souls are being harvested right now. But this is more about, what harvest are you creating for your soul? If you're not creating a harvest, then I would maybe say that, yeah, you are being harvested, but they're not coming after the harvesters. It's when your soul gets empty because you don't, that's the hard part is the intestines in Virgo, right? Stress or not doing anything makes the system slow down your intestines, right? And then that's when problems start happening. You got to keep it flowing, right? You got to keep your body moving, right? It's like those commercials for the old men nowadays, like, keep your body in motion, like, like, I can't, I'm sorry, but you know what I mean? Like, that's Virgo though. You got to stay, even if it's the smallest stuff, it's small, it's Virgo, it's Mercury. It's like keeping, even in your brain, having like a positive affirmation every morning, having having
a bit of a routine that's not really like a routine that's going to suck your soul. Like, to keep, change it up, make it mutable. So
because with all this Pisces, you can get lost without some sort of routine.
That's right. Absolutely.
Like you can get like caught up into psychosomatic syndromes and psychological malfunctioning. And that's one thing I think the greatest plague on the planet right now is the mental health. That's what the astrology is saying. And that's really what's happening.
Yeah. And they've really created like a whole padded cell for people over the last 2 years, right? They just made the padded cell and they stuck people in there.
And like you said, with Saturn and Aquarius, the separation of friendships and groups to even go to, or if you're going to go to get help at a place now, it's like, okay, maybe we could do it online or FaceTime or you need to have the shot in order to even come in here. So you have to sacrifice your own decisions for what you want by somebody else's choices of what you have to do to go into it. It's crazy. You can't even go into a hospital right now if you don't have the shot to go see a loved one right now. Yeah.
I've heard horror stories around that and beyond that too. We're not going to end on that.
No.
But speaking of ending, I have to.
And I have to go too. But I
gotta tap out.
I just want to say that I everybody in here, thank you all for showing up for Robert and I in both of our ways. But I just was telling so many people in my life just how much I love you, man. I feel so grateful to have found you in my life. Of course, I knew of you over the last decade, but it was like, over these last couple of years, just us really connecting and having these talks and it's just been such an honor, and it's been so freeing. And so I'm just so happy to be going through these times and knowing that you're here and the work that you do. It's beautiful work. And it's the work even that was so beautiful that you've been doing for so long with astrology. Just to see it in these times and you showing up is just the most, that's what I admire so much as a friend with you and as a fellow, astrologer, is how much you show up. It's amazing.
Well, thank you, David. I appreciate that. And I could say the exact same thing to you. And you show up whether you're feeling great or not feeling great. You could be a mess. You could be elated. You could be ecstatic. You're fucking authentic, right? And that's what people love about you. And, that was a big piece of me getting you, right? Like, this guy is fucking real. He's the real deal. He's not just, pretending to be an astrologer. He's a real fucking astrologer, and he lays it out there, and you work your ass off. And when I was able to put all those things together about you, it was really interesting. It wasn't long after that, I would say maybe a matter of weeks, like you and I were talking.
Right.
Like, cause I knew about you and I knew about your work, and I'm like, okay, let me check it. Let me check David out some more. And the more that I checked you out, I'm like, fuck, man, this guy he's blue collar. You're a blue collar astrologer, but you also got this rock star thing going on. I'm like, this guy's got it. And it's like, when that happened, you showed up. It was really cool.
Yeah. And that's how it was for me. I was watching your whole entire school on Gaia back in the day. And then when I saw you, and I saw you were having your talks and you were questioning a lot of things that were going on, I'm like, oh, I got you within 1 millisecond. It was just like, dude, where have you been my whole life? That's what it felt like.
Yeah. Well, we're here now, and thank you for sharing the space with me. It's always a blast. And no,
we're gonna do it more. Everybody's demanding that we do it more. So that we
by the way, nice move hooking up with Brian, by the way.
Oh yeah, I know. And I know that you guys talk and stuff, and he's amazing. And trust me, he's been and he's such a great God. He grounds my ass out.
Yeah, that was a solid pickup, man. Good.
I know. And he's a Capricorn, you're a Virgo. I'm like, all right, I got my earth signs here. And he's gonna be like, woo. So
yeah, cool,
he's amazing. Yeah. Well, love you, man. And we'll do it again soon. And all the links will be down below to find Robert's stuff and his channels and his website and so forth. So appreciate everyone. Appreciate you, brother. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, David. Take care.
Adios.